Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon and welcome to the 150th episode of TechStrong TV. I cannot believe we have done 150 episodes. It seems like just yesterday we got started with this endeavor, and we have had some great conversations since then. I'm actually amazed at how well it's taken off and how much the industry has really embraced TechStrong TV. But we are oh so glad and oh so thankful that it has happened, and we have had such great uptake and commentary in general. So thank you all for your support for TechStrong TV in these last 150 episodes, and I hope we can do at least that many more before we're done with this. But I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. But let's talk about today's episode. We have got an outstanding lineup of interviews, starting out with one between Alan Schimmel and Stefan Sigg, Dr. Stefan Sigg, who is the Chief Product Officer of Software AG. He talks with Alan about the results of a survey that they recently did about digital transformation. Obviously, digital transformation is a very, very hot topic these days. And the study actually results showed that 96% of IT directors said their organizations went through a digital transformation last year, and 70% are continuing it this year. So it doesn't sound like digital transformation is going to fall off the list of top 10 topics in 2021. So interesting conversation with Software AG, and definitely one worth listening to. All right, after that, Alan has a conversation with Dan Garfield of CodeFresh. Dan is now the Chief Open Source Officer at CodeFresh, which is kind of an interesting title. I don't think I've heard about organizations kind of creating titles really since the the .com days when everybody was an evangelist. That was the big thing then. But Dan is now talking open source all the time, and it's part of CodeFresh's increased emphasis on open source. So Dan talks to Alan about what a COSO is, what a COSO does, and what it means for the community. I have a feeling it's going to be a really interesting conversation. After that conversation, Alan talks to Willie Tejada with IBM. He's the Chief Developer Advocate at IBM, and he is talking with Alan about the new IBM Elite Hybrid Cloud Build team. Very, very, very interesting idea that IBM has around hybrid cloud, and I guess in a way you can kind of think of the Elite Hybrid Cloud team as like the Red Berets or the Green Berets of hybrid cloud these days. So interesting conversation. Following that, we've got the latest episode of the Haunted Hacker podcast hosted by Mike Jones. This is part 1 of 2. Mike talks to Alton Johnson, who is CEO of a startup automated pen testing platform company called, I think it's Vonahi.io. Might be Vonahai. I'm not quite sure. And I apologize if I mispronounced the name of the company. But Mike always talks to some really, really fascinating individuals, and this sounds like a really interesting technology. So hopefully there's a great conversation there for you as well. After the Haunted Hacker podcast, we in our Something Old segment, we have a recent conversation between Ron and Cindy Gula of Gula Tech Adventures. This is from the recent Predict 2021 virtual summit that we hosted. Ron and Cindy talk about cybersecurity and what some of the things that cybersecurity has done for us. But with the pandemic coming on, obviously everything's been kind of turned on its head. And so Ron and Cindy actually talk about how maybe now is the time to rebrand the industry in the wake of COVID-19 and the fact that so many organizations have really put a renewed focus on cybersecurity, but rebranding the industry to attract more talent and actually increase diversity and engagement across all sectors. So an interesting idea for sure, and definitely one whose time I believe has come for sure. After that, I come back and I've got the headlines for you, as always. And then I have a conversation with Nir Valtman, who is the VP at Finastra and head of product and data security as well. And Matt Maddox, who's the managing principal at Synopsys Software Integrity Group. We talk about a partnership that the two organizations recently entered regarding a fintech application security. Financial services has definitely kind of hit the spotlight, especially over the last year or so, with everybody working from home and having to do pretty much everything from home on their computers. Financial services applications have really kind of come into the spotlight as obviously not only a threat vector for a lot of cyber security professionals to manage effectively, but also just the user engagement and the ability for customers to get to all of their financial information safely and securely, and do it in a way that frankly is a positive user experience for them as well. So Nir and Matt and I have a conversation about what organizations need to consider when they're looking at their financial services applications, what the financial services industry maybe wants to keep in mind when they are developing applications or improving their applications, and really what's ahead for the industry. So great conversation that we have. After that, I have an interview with Rob Cheng, who is the CEO of PCmatic. He and I have a conversation about ransomware and cybersecurity insurance, and whether actually cybersecurity insurance is doing more harm than good when it comes to ransomware. Does it actually increase the likelihood that ransomware incidents and high ransoms will continue, or is it effectively funding the ransomware industry? Interesting conversation, interesting topic, and definitely some food for thought for organizations that are considering cybersecurity insurance. After my conversation with Rob, I come back and I have the webinars preview for you. As always, I tell you about some of the webinars that are coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard that are worth taking the time and registering and attending. And after that, Mitch Ashley comes on with his Analyst Corner segment. In this one, he talks about his upcoming panel at our Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit. And he's going to explore new security trends for 2021 in ransomware, financial payments, collaboration, software, and so much more. So definitely worth checking out as well. Mitch is very, very well versed in the security space, and he's got a lot of really great insight in just what's happening in the space in general. So definitely worth checking that one out. After that, we have Mike Vizard, who will have his conversation with Joshua Laurie, who is the Senior Director of Product and Technical Marketing within the Cloud Business Unit at VMware. He and Mike talk about observability and how easy for me to say, how observability enabled by the VMware Skyline service is changing the way IT is managed. VMware Skyline is really an interesting way of doing observability, and Mike and Joshua talk about the technology and really what it means for the industry as a whole. So definitely another fascinating conversation worth checking out. I think that's it. So we are going to get started with today's broadcast right after these commercial messages.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back. First up, we've got a conversation between Stefan Sig, who's Chief Product Officer at Software AG, and Alan. They're talking about the results of a survey that Software AG recently did about digital transformation. The results are really fascinating, so let's give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. My guest for this segment is Stefan Sig of Software AG, joining us from Germany today. Stefan, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you, Alan, for having me. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. So, Stefan, look, our audience is a very technical audience. They're familiar with Software AG. But just in case, why don't we give them a little bit of background on Software AG and maybe a little bit of your own background as well.
Okay, so Software AG is the second largest software company in Germany. So we are around quite a long time, going all the way back more than 50 years to the times when we all were working on mainframes and inventing program languages. Then we're still around, which is an asset on its own. By now, we are very much majoring in integration technology, integration middleware, expanding the idea of integration into the world of IoT, which is in a certain sense also nothing else than integration of devices. And we are helping customers to turn their data, general data, integration data, but also increasingly IoT data, turning that data into some kind of business value and business outcome. Well, that's our mission. So what about me? So I'm, now 4 years with Software AG, responsible there for all kinds of product-related stuff, serving as a member of the executive board. They call me the Chief Product Officer. That's one of these CXO roles that are evolving all the time. Before that, I spent more than 20 years with the biggest German software provider, which is SAP, and where I did various jobs, always on the product side, topics like data warehouses.
XO titles that we hear about. I read an interesting article today that CPOs are the new CIOs, CPOs are the new CTOs, right? That when we looked at the role of the CTO, it's really been being replaced in many organizations with CPO, Chief Product Officer, who's driving that, driving that vision and that strategy. But anyway, thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us the background. Wanted to talk a little bit about today because recently Software AG had conducted a survey and study, some research around digital transformation. Of course, 2020 was a bang-up year for digital transformation because with everything that was going on in the world, COVID and everything else, the companies literally had to digitize like they've never had to before. And it's brought some interesting, there's been winners and losers. It's made some interesting things. I'm interested to hear from you, Stefan, what some of the findings were, what you think the trends are. Yeah. What do you think it means? We don't need the exact numbers per se. What are the big trends? What's the messages?
I think for me, there were two major, let's say, plays that have been very much accelerated through the pandemic. Number one is working remotely. I mean, we do it now. We work remotely through Zoom in this case. There are many other collaboration tools, but working remotely is not only super relevant for in a private setup, but also in a business setup. Working remotely with machines, working remotely with robots. Making sure that the physical world is transferred into a digital world where there are the so-called digital twins you can work with. And those companies who have been further down the road to digitize also their assets, in the world of what we call Internet of Things, have been, much easier to cope with the pandemic than perhaps others who still rely on the necessity of physical interaction with the tools. So, this was a big driver, working remotely, condition monitoring, for example, of machines from a remote perspective, predictive maintenance applications that would, tell a technician when to come on site and maybe when not. Yeah. So these things, we have been seeing a lot of traction. And the number two area was business continuity. It was very clear that companies who have laid out their strategy, laid out their processes as to what to do when something happens, and something can be many things. Can be nobody really thought about a pandemic, right? But you can have at least structurally, prepare yourself for some kind of catastrophe, or impacts or issues. So people were thinking, those people who thought about, okay, let's prepare for that, had been better off than people who just say, come on. I mean, who knows if it happens? So I'm not thinking about business continuity preparation. So, and then maybe there's even a third one. And the third one that has been accelerated a lot, in my point of view, from my perception, is the move into the cloud. Yeah. So the cloud is just ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. And it has a tendency to be much easier to work also remotely, to work, in a distributed way if you are working with assets that are deployed in the cloud. And we have been seeing an acceleration that people go into the cloud with their data centers, and we are helping customers to reintegrate their landscape once they have moved parts of their IT stuff into the cloud. We take care and we know how to do cloud-to-cloud integration, cloud to on-premise integration, and maybe still on-premise and premise integration. And by integration, I mean, having all those systems and applications talking to each other in a consistent way. Talking to it, exchange orders, for example, or exchange, people information or production information. The flow of the data between systems that are not designed so easily to talk to each other. That's what we do. That's what, integration middleware is all about.
Absolutely. It's good stuff. I think we've hit on several things here, IoT, cloud, etc. I think for a lot of those are looking back at 2020, things we saw happening that are going to continue and accelerate in 2021. I think another big area for 2021 that wasn't really big yet in 2020 is 5G.
Yes.
And what that's going to mean.
Yeah.
And maybe, quite frankly, maybe 2021 is still not 5G time, right? Maybe that'll be another year or two out of there. But I'm wondering if that showed itself in the survey, or if you're hearing that from executives.
So we see that very much. So we are working with a lot of production industry companies. So industry that, own a factory or run a shop floor environment. And we see in a lot of scenarios where digitalization is not entirely or completely cloud-based. You need to have also some assets on the edge, as they call it. So there are some computers on the factory floor that have a very important role to play. And we are able to deploy our software that connects to the devices also on those edge computers, right? And then from those edge computers, we, make all the connection to the cloud, where we, of course, store the big data and where we do more analytics type of stuff. But when it comes to real-time scenarios, and real-time scenarios are very important these days, in the wave of digitalization, you have to be on the edge. And now 5G, of course, is accelerating a lot, data connectivity, networking, let's say, capabilities on the edge. So there is no necessity to build up to make wirings of things or to build up, in a complicated way, a Wi-Fi network. So 5G is just a fantastic technology to even more so enable edge-based applications or edge-based analytics on the shop floor, for example. So I can give you maybe a tangible example. So one of our customers, by the name of Dürr, is a German world market leader in car painting robots, right? So they build huge robots. They even built the whole environment where the cars come in and get painted. It's almost a clean room. So of course, what they want is, if something goes wrong, they need to immediately stop the painting because they want to avoid that a number of cars get painted wrongly. In previous times, there was a human being looking at, the output of the paint process with a very experienced pair of eyes. But once that person is identifying something went wrong, there were already 5 to 10 other cars wrongly painted, and they have to be routed into a very, let's say, sophisticated depainting process. Now we have everything on the edge. We have a real-time, logic AI running and is giving immediately an alert if something goes wrong or if there is evidence that something will go wrong very early, and that is helping this company to add value to their already very expensive asset to be sold to the automotive companies. So
sure.
That is, of course, if you have 5G, these kind of real-time quality and maintenance prevention applications will be even more so enabled than before.
Agreed. And I think that's also indicative of, and this is the nature of technology. You and I have both been in technology for many years. Before we even perfect the one thing, we're on to the next thing. So while we're moving everything to the cloud, we're also now strengthening the edge, right? Because the edge is becoming the new frontier. And when we have 5G technologies, all this, right, it'll make it even more important. So, it's the never-ending story, if you will, of, what's next. It never ends. But it's exciting, too, because it does. I mean, this automotive technology or example is but one example.
Yes.
Of many, many things that this will enable.
Let me give you another example, which I like very much. We have one customer by the name of Nordex. They built windcraft farms. So they built those wind turbines, those huge, propellers, if you want, standing there out there, and they want to quality monitor all these wind turbines. They want to do, condition monitoring on those wind turbines, and there is an edge component on the turbine, and there is the cloud component that is collecting all the data. And that's huge data. This is hundreds of terabytes per 6 weeks or so. They accumulate hundreds of terabytes of data that is helping them to be even more efficient in producing renewable energy. I guess it's a good thing to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And as this future unfolds, I think we're going to see more and more of these kinds of applications popping up. Stefan, for people who want to get more information about the particulars of the survey, maybe some of the metrics, etc., where can they go to find out more information? Do you know?
Well, it's softwareag.com, and there will be just 2 or 3 clicks away from that survey. If I'm not mistaken, we put it even on the first page. So, or to just use your most favorite search engine out there. It will be very easy to be found.
Sure is. And look, all the organizations we've spoken with, this move to the cloud, this move towards digitization is it's funny. Organizations that were already on the road to doing it have accelerated their move to it. Organizations that were still talking about it have accelerated to doing it. Organizations that weren't talking about it, I don't know if they're around yet to even start talking about it, because if they haven't started yet, they're in a lot of trouble. That's trouble. True. They got to move it.
And I think one could see it even more, let's say, general. I think it's not only the adoption of the cloud in various industries. I guess it's also the realization that the data that they have needs software to be transformed into a service that is also subject of a new business concept, a new monetization concept. Yeah. And many people nowadays ask me, Stefan, can you explain to me why on earth is it the case that Tesla is valuated so, astronomically high on the market?
As the next 5 car companies combined.
Yeah. And they're just selling a fraction of the cars, making a fraction of the turnover. Well, people on Wall Street tell you the reason. They say they're not looking at Tesla solely as a car manufacturer, but as a software company.
We're a company, absolutely.
Tesla is using the car as a device to ship software. And we all know the scale of software and the profitability of software-based services are very different from selling physical cars, right?
Sure.
And this kind of projection, that all of a sudden a car is something similar like your smartphone being a device to sell software. If that comes true, then of course it's a whole different ball game in looking at Tesla as a software company, which it actually is, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
In a way, it's a software company that taught itself how to build cars, which is not so easy.
Some say it's just a battery with a car built around it, but
it's a piece of software with a car built.
It is. I've had discussions. I've interviewed folks from Jaguar, from BMW, from GM about this, and whether it's an electric vehicle or not, the amount of software that are in today's cars. I spoke to the guy from Jaguar, just in the steering and shocks, the shock system, the ride. I forget 4 or 6 million lines of code in the today's Jaguar from that. BMW, same thing. I forgot how many microprocessed CPUs the average car today has. Yeah, so many is right.
Actually, the challenge to reduce the number of CPUs and to make that thing just one computer that is guiding your experience when you sit in and,
across.
You need to have a smartphone experience in your car, if you want. And the interesting thing is that it's now also transitioning to other industries. So other industries think, what would my way of Tesla be to become at least partially a software company? And that's exactly where we as Software AG kick in and say, we can help you. Because software skills and the ability to build software is not so widely spread in the industry. Yeah? So it's very concentrated at some software companies, and to build up a software practice in a non-software industry is not so easy, but we're happy to help.
Yep, and that's your job, right? Every company has to be a software company at some point in the future. Stefan, we're about out of time. I want to thank you for coming on and joining us here on TechStrong TV. Great work. Keep up the great work at Software AG, and come back and see us again.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Great fun talking to you.
Stefan Sigg, CPO at Software AG here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our next guest.
The security landscape is evolving rapidly in the face of disruption. Growing cyber threats, a global pandemic, and other factors have irrevocably changed the way organizations view and adopt security technologies. Cybersecurity 2021, the new normal, will bring together thought leaders, security experts, and IT professionals in the new security landscape and what's ahead in the years to come. On topics ranging from ransomware to DevSecOps, from speakers including Chen Zi Wang of Rain Capital, Richard Steenan of IT Harvest, and Ira Winkler of Secure Mentum. Visit MediaOps.com/cybersecurity 2021 to register.
All right, next up, we've got Dan Garfield, who is now the Chief Open Source Officer at CodeFresh. He talks with Alan about what a COSO is, what a COSO does, and what it means to the community. So let's give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. We've got another TechStrong TV segment for you. My guest for this segment is my friend Dan Garfield from CodeFresh. And Dan it's nice to see you, my friend. Dan, you've got some news to share with the audience. Why don't you tell us all about it?
Sure. So I've just accepted a new role as the Chief Open Source Officer at CodeFresh, which is going to allow me to focus a lot more on our open source initiatives. And it's really about changing the way that CodeFresh works today. We've always been a company that has participated in open source, but our main platform has never been built primarily on open source, and we're changing that. So that's a big strategic shift for CodeFresh, yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize that was wrapped up into this. We're going to jump on that in a second. What I wanted to ask you about is, look, this is something that I think our audience is wrapping their heads around. We've gone from a world where a C-level person was the CEO, the CFO, CTO, CIO.
Yeah.
Those were your kind of chiefs. Then we had CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Now we've gone on the world of what we're calling CXO, right? Where we have things like Chief Digital Officer, Chief Product Officer, Chief People Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, and now Chief Open Source Officer. Chief Open Source Officer. So is that how do you pronounce that? COSO, SOSO?
I like to call it SOSO.
You like it SOSO.
COSO is probably better.
I think COSO, COSO sounds, it has more gravitas. So we'll go, I like gravitas. We'll go with COSO. But, I didn't realize that this coincides with CodeFresh moving to more of an open platform. Because I know, look, I had this discussion last week with some analysts or something, and that is with the advent of Kubernetes and then GitOps and a lot of the stuff we've seen over the last 12, 18 months, it's also been a time where basically we've taken this whole market, which at one time was called CI/CD, right? And we didn't say CI without saying CD. You didn't say CD without saying CI, right? They were joined at the hip. And we said, wait a second, I think we might bifurcate that, right? And CI is not necessarily CD, though they're two separate things. And just because you did one well, doesn't mean that solution was the solution for the other. And so we've seen that, and we've also seen the whole market flip on its head, right? Where maybe some of the older established players, quite frankly, have gotten a little long in the tooth. And a lot of the, fresher, no pun intended, a lot of the fresher solutions are starting to rise up because they're built for a cloud native world. They're built, for GitOps and Kube and all of these things.
Yeah, once you start doing GitOps, you start doing progressive delivery, it really becomes clear how little CD there has been in CI/CD historically. It's a term that's so loaded and overused, and it doesn't really mean the same thing that it used to. And the way we think about delivering software today, where you're working off of a complex microservice-based architecture, you've got hundreds or thousands of changes you're doing per day, that really changes the way that you interact with the entire development lifecycle. And CI/CD is kind of the old practice, the way that it used to be done. it wasn't really ever designed for that microservice-based world, that Kubernetes, that cloud-native world. And so the tools that are coming out now, what we're doing with GitOps, what we're doing with Argo, what we're doing with some other projects, that's really changing the way that you deploy software, and it's allowing you to be a lot more dynamic. JFrog likes to say liquid. I think that's a good description as well. But all of it really does start with the open source. Anybody that's trying to do this in a totally closed way, in a proprietary way, in a way that doesn't give back to the community, that's just not the way that people build and consume software today. We want to have community. We want to be able to give back. We want to be able to share changes and share those core components of our business. And so that's what we're doing. That's where open source is going, and that's where CI/CD is going. And we really describe it now as a DevOps automation platform, because if you say CI/CD, people don't understand that there's actually a lot more going on. If you talk about a DevOps automation platform, there are pipelines involved, there's GitOps involved, there's artifact management involved. There's all these components that you need to bring in orchestration together, and you need to do it in a very clear, smooth, concise, opinionated way. So that's really the direction we're going.
I like it. I like it. And I think, in many ways, a name can define something. One of the conversations I had last week, I was thinking now, is with Giodi Bonzel, the founder of Harness, right? They just raised, I don't know, $150 million and did a unicorn thing, right? And I asked him why. Why'd you do Harness? You made a fortune on AppDynamics, right? You did really well there. What drove you to do Harness? And he said, Alan, one of the things that came out of our research and what I witnessed firsthand is CI/CD in certain situations was better than waterfall, but there was no one jumping up and down saying how great it was. It never really worked, especially as we got into microservices, cloud native kind of stuff. It was never designed for that role, for that job. Like, there was a time when CI by itself meant something, right? It was CI. Yeah. We were doing continuous integration. When we tried to marry the CD thing to it, it was a bit of a clutch, quite frankly, right? And then
we sometimes compare it to audio video conferencing, where it's like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's like, did that exist? Yeah, I mean, we all did video conferencing 10 years ago. What happened when Zoom came out is it became much easier, much more reliable, much more stable. It really matured it, and it was the first time when you could actually use software that just worked pretty well, didn't need a lot of hand-holding, was pretty reliable. And that's the way CI/CD has been in DevOps automation. There's been lots of tools. People have figured out how to run bash scripts in a million different ways.
Exactly.
That's not what we're talking about anymore.
Way before it was called CI/CD too. But I'll tell you, I'm reminded, so I'm older than you, as you know, Dan. I remember having a Windows phone back before there was an iPhone.
Right.
And they started talking about the iPhone coming out. Steve Jobs did, that first thing. And I was like, dude, everything he's saying I could do on my Windows phone right now, right? And I remember my friend Andrew Greeley, he works up at Nike, I think now, but Andrew said, no, he's Australian. He was like, mate, it's about the apps. There's going to be 10,000 apps. I was like, you know how long it's going to take them to have 10,000 apps? Well, they probably have 10 million apps now, but not very long at all. Exactly. Yeah. And it blew it away. I don't use my Windows phone no more. I think we've gone through the same thing.
The shift from a BlackBerry or a Windows phone to an iPhone is certainly as big as traditional CI/CD to GitOps. When you start doing GitOps, you have a sort of programmatic, opinionated way of handling things. It's very scalable. And we have customers using this in secure locations. We have defense customers, healthcare customers. We have people who are managing on-prem instances across a multitude of hospitals. And the GitOps is really the key component. It allows you to really have a staged approach to your deployment that is so simple and straightforward and reliable that people are able to move much, much faster than they used to.
Absolutely. So Dan, let's turn to CodeFresh being open, and what does that mean really? And I don't. If I put you on the spot, just tell me so. But are you telling us we're going to have an open source version of CodeFresh soon?
So I'm not quite coming out that far yet. We are basically working on organizing our engineers to do a lot more open source contributions. And we've done open source contributions in the past, right? We were core contributors on Helm. We contributed to CNAB. We contributed to a number of other different open source projects. But what we're really trying to do is bring open source straight into our DNA and make it part of our core company strategy, where we say, okay, we should be opening source some of our components. We should find more open source components that we can build on and give back to. And so I'm not necessarily coming out and saying, hey, we're going to have an open source version of CodeFresh tomorrow that you can just grab. But we are making a big commitment to shift the way we think about open source and basically trying to mainline it into our company strategy.
Love it. All right, we may come back to that, but let me delve into your role a little bit here. One of the interesting things with all these CXO positions that I've observed is that some of them are sort of internally focused, some of them are externally focused, some of them are both, right? So is your mission to evangelize open source and CodeFresh's vision of open source in the market, or is it to, change CodeFresh's own use, views, involvement in open source, or maybe it's both?
It's probably both. It's a little bit heavier on the external side than the internal side, but there are both components to that. My team and my organization is working a lot on building out better guide rails for how people should approach GitOps, not just with CodeFresh, but in general. So we're doing a lot of work with the GitOps working group, which is something that I helped found with a few other companies, with AWS and Azure and Weaveworks and a few other folks.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a CNCF project officially, which is great. So we're really trying to build a stable, predictable way of doing GitOps. And you can think of it similar to what happened with 9-factor app. That was really effective at helping people understand how they should, 12-factor. But 12-factor app, that was a really
didn't stop the Germans when they bombed Pearl Harbor. I was going to let you go.
Yeah, 12-factor app, but that really became a stable pattern that people could use and grab. And so we're trying to do that with GitOps, where in the past there's been some discussion of, this GitOps, this isn't GitOps, this, you're not doing it right, you are doing it right. We don't want to have a dogmatic kind of definition. Right. But we do want to have a clear on-ramp to say, okay, here's how you can get to a more GitOps-friendly setup. These are the benefits. These are the people that are doing it. Let's look at the patterns that people are successfully using, and let's publicize them and document them and make sure that everybody has them. So we think that the market can go much, much faster with this kind of discipline. So that's a lot of the external work that we're doing, in addition to the internal work that I have as well.
Excellent. GitOps is, of course, a subject that we cover a lot here on TechStrong TV and at DevOps.com and Container Journal, our cloud native site. And one of the things we hear is that, again, like the move from CI to CI/CD, I don't know if quantum leap's the right word, but a step ahead, a step forward in getting a better handle, especially in a Kubernetes environment. Using GitOps. But we've got to remember that it is in and of itself a relatively new sort of framework, use of technology in and of itself, and that it still has a lot of maturing, growing, evolving to go.
Yeah, for sure. And getting those patterns well met and well documented. I mean, there are people still having discussions about what the core tenets of GitOps even are.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're working on in the GitOps working group, and we should have a document to release very soon that we're working on making sure that we have consensus with the community. And it's not meant to be dogmatic. It's not meant to be gatekeeping. It's meant to be a simple on-ramp that you can follow. And so getting GitOps mainstreamed and getting that popular, I think there's still confusion. Even people say, well, GitOps, how is that different from infrastructure as code, right? And it's true, it's hard to do GitOps.
It's an element of it, absolutely.
But there are some very clear, distinct differences. How we use an operator that's going to synchronize changes, the pull versus push model, making sure that things are under version control. Those are all components, and when you bring them together, you end up with a really effective system for software development and deployment.
Absolutely. So I'm assuming in your what we say COSO. In your COSO, you will remain CodeFresh's kind of board member on the GitOps board project with through CNCF. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to continue to be heavily involved in the GitOps working group. I've been heavily involved with the Argo project and a few other projects, and going to be continuing to not only direct my time, but the resources within my organization to continue to contribute to those things.
Very cool. And what about your old role? I mean, you were kind of chief evangelist, and forgive me, I don't remember your old title. If it was project.
So I'm a bit of an odd duck. I was both the chief technology evangelist and the VP of marketing. My background is in engineering. I've been an engineer my whole life. I am sitting in a pile of parts. I've been for my home lab cluster that I have here, but I've been a full stack developer my whole career. But when I've been doing marketing as well, and I found that as a marketer with a technical background, I could have a superpower. I could be much more effective than maybe just being a mediocre engineer. So in that role, I was kind of unique in that I was the chief technology evangelist, and so I was focused a lot on the external evangelism. And in my role, I've also built a lot of the partnerships with CodeFresh. I built a relationship with Google. I built a relationship with Microsoft that led to them investing in us and a few others. And so being in the open source world, this is something that's new and kind of unique that we talked about, and figuring out how to work with the community and more effectively make sure that we're doing the right things with the open source projects and adopting them. That all kind of led to the idea of, hey, what if we could separate this? We could actually make this a focus, and I could build an organization focused around that. So it's unique. And the thing that I just tell myself every day when people say, what does that even do? What is that title? You say, well, all titles are made up. So this is a newer one. That's for sure.
I will tell you that Still Secure was a company I had co-founded before I did all of this. So back in like 2004 or 5, I changed my title to Chief Strategy Officer, which now is a very common title. Every company has one. Back then it wasn't. People were like, what? And CXO, the whole CXO thing wasn't what it is today. People are like, what is this, some made-up title? I said, yeah, pretty much, But that really fit kind of what my role was, right? I had my hand in a lot, in product decisions, marketing, sales, biz dev, operations. I was pretty involved in stuff, and so it worked for me. I'm sure this will work for you as well.
Yeah, I'm not the only one. There are dozens of us. Dozens.
All right, I'm looking for them. Well, you let us know. Maybe we'll do a Chief Open Source Officer panel at some future event or something.
That'd be great.
But cool stuff. All right. Hey, Dan, no, seriously, congratulations on this new title. I'm sure you're going to rock and roll it, man. We'll be watching.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Alan.
All righty. Dan Garfield, COSO, Chief Open Source Officer at CodeFresh here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Next up, Alan talks with Willie Tejada over at IBM. He's the Chief Developer Advocate. He talks about the new IBM Elite Hybrid Cloud Build Team. Interesting conversation. Let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to another session here on TechStrong TV. My guest for this session is Willie Tejada from IBM. I'm going to let Willie tell you about what he does at IBM, but first let's welcome him. Hey, Willie, how are you, man? Welcome to TechStrong TV.
Alan, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to actually be here and tell you a little bit about what I do for IBM and what we're doing in the hybrid cloud industry and the motion there that IBM has as it relates roughly to actually building both applications on the hybrid cloud platform and infusing AI and data along the way.
Absolutely. I know there's a lot going on with hybrid cloud, obviously, and not just at IBM, frankly, around the whole world, but we're going to get more into it. Willie, why don't you give our audience, though, a little background, like what your present position is at IBM,
Sure.
But maybe a little bit of your own personal career history as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Alan, I've been in the business for, north of 30 years and seen the evolution of platform to platform. At IBM, I'm IBM's Chief Developer Advocate. The business that I run is essentially the general manager for the ISVs as well as what we refer to as the build partners. Now, let me put that into context and frame that in terms of how does that translate to what I do for IBM? Because we recently announced something that I think is actually very relevant to folks who are interested in hybrid cloud. You know, Arvind Krishna, our CEO, emphasized the company's maniacal focus on open hybrid cloud and AI in our last earnings call, and the amount of investments that we've actually placed inside of both ecosystems and our effort in many cases around hybrid cloud and how it's changing the requirements for our clients. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, you have to remember that most of our clients are already actually dealing with up to 6 clouds. And so think about that complexity of that landscape. It's not just IBM's offerings, but it's IBM's as well as Microsoft's, as well as AWS's, as well as Google's. And that's the just natural course of business. And so when Arvind calls that out, it's because he's really focused on what the clients are looking for. That's the landscape and call it the solution set that they're trying to solution for. You know, on February 4th, we unveiled a team running for me, and you can kind of think of it as a special ops team. We refer to it as the hybrid cloud build team. Now, imagine essentially that you have a group of experts, cloud architects, cloud developers, subject matter experts on AI and security, where their sole purpose is essentially to help our clients and our partners develop and build their solutions for this hybrid cloud environment. And what's key about that is I'll mention again, an open hybrid cloud environment, because everything these days is rooted in open source software. And what they really actually do is focus in on how can they actually bring expertise to bear that they've gathered over the course, roughly basically, of their own experience, not just on one vendor, but across essentially the exact landscape that our partners and our clients deal with, which is a mix of 6 different types of clouds, whether it be Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or it be a mixture of public and private, and take that expertise and utilize that in a way that we build solutions both for our ecosystem partners that ultimately serves our clients. And so as an example, we've taken companies like LTI through this process of a build process. And it starts kind of in this 3-step process. We kind of go through a design, really taking a look at the requirements. We actually then go through a skilling process, the second phase, because ultimately what we want is we want the partners to be able to develop and take their solutions forward. And that has to do with a skills transfer. The technology landscape is moving so quickly that there is a skills gap. Open source has really kind of introduced this. There's not one company out there that can really out-innovate a thriving open source community. So it creates this skills gap. And so what ends up happening is our ability to actually pull these people together and create kind of this special ops teams actually best services both our clients and our partners because they're most familiar with the technologies as well as the use case scenarios. In a case that we did for a company called LTI, who services the financial services industry, specifically, we were looking at an insurance application. And typically you think about that as dealing with systems of record. And what we did was we took a look at systems of engagement, how to infuse it actually into their underwriting application. So I'll give you an example. They're trying to actually figure out risk for a particular business. And we were able to actually infuse AI into that application, pull from the variety of sources that might be in social media that are referring basically to this business, incorporate things like navigation and mapping to actually get an idea of what are people saying about that business? Is it in a high risk profile area? Has it had recent positive or negative sentiment associated with that business? And it helps influence them from the underwriting perspective in terms of insurance. Completely not thought of as an attribute when you think about an underwriting application. So taking experts that have experts in data and AI, taking experts that have this idea of how do I actually containerize applications and modernize them, and then actually doing that for those partners as they service basically clients. So this team, like I mentioned before, it's over 100 strong, and really about taking their decades of experience across Microsoft Azure, AWS, as well as IBM environments, and putting it to bear on our partners as well as our clients' problems and challenges and solving for them.
I didn't realize it was that big a team, Willie. I'll give you, for instance, my friend John Willis, well known in DevOps, works with Red Hat. He's part of, I forget the team, it's more of a tiger team kind of thing, just 4 or 5 people. Kevin Bear, co-author of Phoenix Project, Andrew Clay Schaefer, one of the founders of Puppet, Jade Bloom. 4 brilliant guys. They are part of a team at Red Hat that I know goes and interacts, for instance, with CIOs and stuff like that about how DevOps, Agile, Open, hybrid cloud can help their organization. But this is a different scale altogether, right? This is 100+ people, right? You've got some firepower right on the bench there that can help. Let me ask a question, if you don't mind. Is the focus on, well, let's identify the ISV or the partner or the customer and go in and help him with his specific or their specific needs or use case? Or is it more, hey, based upon what we know, let's create the right environment? And it's a one-to-many thing, right? A lot of our partners, a lot of our customers need this. And we're
that's a good question.
Right?
I'd say in the end, Alan, there's this very simple equation that we actually take a look at, is that when we create value for our partners and value for our clients, it creates value basically for IBM. So that's kind of a macro thing, right? Yep. But when you really actually get into it, you take, for example, those Red Hat individuals that you actually mentioned. We have a very unique strategy in Red Hat OpenShift, which is the key enabler for us to essentially build on multiple platforms. The whole concept of build once and deploy anywhere is at its root enabled by OpenShift, and at the core of that is Kubernetes. So, if you think about in our industry, have we ever actually had everybody in the industry say this platform or they're subscribing to the platform being the de facto standard? I think prior to Kubernetes, there was only one other time that happened when it was kind of like .NET and Java. We had 2 things, right?
Right. There were two platforms.
The 2 platforms. In this era, basically, Kubernetes is it. And so when you think about OpenShift at the heart of that, you really need expertise that can actually bring value with that as the core anchor tenant, which means that there's going to be other clouds. There's going to be a mix of public and private. And to your point, this is really about with our partners co-creation, right? So, it is about actually developing with them in a very experiential way. And you know what that requires is it requires technologists these days. It requires the cloud architects. It requires the subject matter experts in data and AI and automation. It requires cloud developers roughly that can come in and do shoulder-to-shoulder development with those particular partners in mind and clients as well. But my particular focus here is actually in the investment we're making in ecosystem. And it's about $1 billion of investment actually in ecosystem overall that Arvind has actually declared. And hybrid cloud build team is just one portion of that. But it's investing actually in those partners to essentially take better advantage of this market opportunity, which is the hybrid cloud, open hybrid cloud opportunity. And with this skill set, making sure that they can accelerate their business and as well, more appropriately, actually deal with what their clients are dealing with, which is a multi-cloud environment.
Yep. Willie, I want to explore a little bit, it's not just hybrid cloud. You said it now 2 or 3 times. It's open hybrid cloud, right? And when we talk about Kubernetes and why it's become so dominant, I mean, and it is dominant, there's no doubt about it, faster than anything I've ever seen, become so dominant. I think a big part of that is because it's open, right? And not only Kubernetes itself, but we look at this whole, call it cloud native ecosystem. It's all open. It's all open. And I think IBM, look, IBM's always been a big open source supporter, contributor, right? Unlike
Absolutely,
other companies. Yep.
Absolutely.
But,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
No. I think you know where I'm going. Run with it.
I do. Because, we are in the era of open source being the de facto method for how people acquire technology, how people build the skill sets, and how people advance roadmaps. So, again, I'll emphasize that I don't think there's an example to date of a single company being able to out-innovate a thriving open source community. So I run also the open source effort for IBM. And one of the things that we're all about is how do we actually get the most powerful technologies into the industry via open source that will help not just the industries themselves, but also help roughly society in general, because everybody's pulling basically in terms of open source. So it doesn't matter if it's Kubernetes as a singular platform or TensorFlow or Kubeflow or KF pipelines on the data and AI side. All of these technologies are no longer with the single vendors. They're actually inside of the open source communities, where what we're looking for is not just people taking and utilizing those technologies, but we're encouraging folks essentially to participate and give back into those communities so that they can actually advance and innovate much quicker. So even at IBM, one of the aspirations that we actually have is to have our key developers be committers and maintainers inside of those communities. Because when they're doing that, they're just not leveraging the technologies, they're giving back. And they're also working with others in that community to help advance those communities going forward. I think it's a big difference of the way IBM participates in the open communities. It's not just taking a look at open source as a distribution platform. It's really actually taking a look at them and saying how they have this approach of an upstream community feeding a downstream product. And when you utilize it in that particular fashion, you're committed not just to that community, but you're committed to the whole industry who's leveraging that community and building products on it. So IBM is really about commitment to advancing essentially that technology for industry and society's good. And then at the same time frame, adding innovation actually to that best benefits essentially both our partners and our clients. And that comes in the form of the developers actually giving back to the community.
Yep. Look, in a case of maybe, serving sushi out the back of the bait shop, right? Having that framework of this open community facilitates your partner and ISV interactions, right? Because rather than it being the IBM partnership or we're all working on this project together, No, it's IBM and so and so and so and so and partner and we're all working on an open standard it's not an IBM standard. It
100%, Alan. You're
right?
hitting it.
Whether it's a CNCF, whatever foundation it is, right? We're all part of this community, and we all work. So it kind of gives you a framework.
Absolutely, and
build
keep in
your
mind,
ISVs on.
Look, open source is good for everybody, right? When you think about it, if you're a hiring manager in any one of these particular areas, and we see this with the hybrid cloud build team, expertise that you gain in Kubernetes is good for IBM. But quite honestly, it's reusable across every one of the other, name the vendor, name the ecosystem partner, name the client. Kubernetes basically expertise will be leveraged no matter where you place that person on that project. So from an open source perspective, you have very fungible skill sets. You have very agile skill sets that can be applied across the board if your strategy is rooted in open source. And so that's one of the key factors where you don't have a vendor lock-in flavor and you have better utility basically of the resources that you have. So, the hybrid cloud build team being rooted in open source are masters in these particular skill sets and technology communities. And then their experience is grounded them in real world implementations so they can actually bring to bear expertise in financial services and application of that technology in those particular verticals, or a use case that spans multiple clouds and a mixture of public and on-prem. So even though it is rooted in open source, the value that we bring to the table is the practical use of those technologies when it comes to solving business problems.
Yep. I want to, Willie, also pull back now to IBM. And as you mentioned, this team is just one, maybe it's the tip of the spear, but it's one aspect of the open hybrid cloud kind of go-to-market that IBM is pursuing. You mentioned $1 billion investment. IBM recently announced they built some build packs, right, around open hybrid cloud, which again, not just IBM software, partnering with companies like GitLab and others, right, putting together a pack of, hey man, you want to move to the cloud, you want to digitize, here's what you need, right? Here's a build pack for you.
Exactly. Another
example of how, this go-to-market for IBM hybrid cloud is, it is. It's
we had
to say the tip of the spear, there's no tip. It's broad.
Exactly. And, it's encompassed, you mentioned basically the partnership with GitLab. But at a macro level, we've revamped everything from our partner program in something that we call Partner World 2.0. We've established essentially a hybrid cloud ecosystem that is a transformation where a hybrid cloud build team is one part of that, but it's also a transformation of how we service our clients in the field on a global basis. And then if you think about it, we've also established and brought to bear even just something called a cloud engagement fund, which is how do we actually bring to bear resources across credits on our platform, financial support to go to market, as well as resources in a hybrid cloud build team for folks who roughly have a solution set where they're saying, I want to solve for this problem. And how can IBM and us as a partner co-create to actually get to where we want to get to? And we can bring to bear the cloud engagement fund on exactly that. And then you mentioned Red Hat. Last year we launched something called the Red Hat Marketplace, which is taking OpenShift and OpenShift at its core, and then making available solutions that are based on Red Hat OpenShift, and streamlining the way people acquire, making sure roughly that they have these attributes that you won't find anywhere else. Because keep in mind, when you do hybrid cloud, you're going to have workloads running in different places. And so how do you do tracking of those workloads? How do you do metering of those workloads? How do you do orchestration of those workloads? And Red Hat Marketplace is the only place that you'll be able to actually do exactly that function. So it's an ideal environment for procuring essentially partners that are in that build process and procuring them for their clients and maintaining a level of visibility on how their workloads are actually being utilized. A very, very unique platform if you're interested in building in a hybrid cloud environment. And then the last is the investment in the industry cloud ecosystems. We partnered with Bank of America to stand up something called the IBM Financial Services Ready Public Cloud. It took a look at what were the challenges for highly regulated industries in adopting public cloud, and then bringing to bear essentially the number of requirements so that a financial services or highly regulated industry can adopt the public cloud and rest assured that they have the compliance, security, and all the vendors that they're working with adopt and inherit those same compliance and security attributes to help accelerate the business and give a broader portfolio of solutions that they can pick from. So we're doing, as you mentioned, Alan, a tremendous surface area and investment in ecosystems. And it goes everything from depth in a particular area like financial services to as broad as what can we actually do on open source to help facilitate this for our partners, where the hybrid cloud build team basically is focused.
Got it. Willie, we're about out of time. I'm going to ask you the hardest question maybe that I posed to you, and that is, all right, where can we go get all of this information? Give me one URL, Willie.
Yeah.
Ties it all up for people out here.
Well, one of the things I think that especially for the technologists actually out there is they can go to developer.ibm.com. As IBM's chief developer advocate, I think one of the things that folks are looking for is they're looking for how do they maintain their skills? How do they actually find use cases? Who do they find in terms of peers? You know, we have this framework that's called code, content, and community. And if they go to developer.ibm.com, what they'll find is a framework there. Where can I find code that helps me get my job done? Where's there content that helps me essentially understand that code and better adopt it? And then if I'm having challenges, is there a community of experts that can help me actually bring it all together? It's a vehicle that the hybrid cloud build team utilizes, as well as IBM's largest clients. So developer.ibm.com is a place I'd start. And then if you have an engagement for the hybrid cloud build team, you'll find resources there of how to engage them explicitly.
Willie, hey man, thank you so much for coming up and being our guest here and giving us all this information. Fantastic stuff. You know, IBM's putting their money where their mouth is on this open hybrid cloud, and it's good to see it coming to market. I think we all, like you said earlier, we all benefit from when it's open like this, and looking forward to seeing how it rolls out over the coming year.
Hey,
Come
Alan,
back and visit us.
I will do exactly that. Thanks for bringing these kind of topics to bear. We really appreciate it. It's great for the industry. It's great for the folks basically who are participating in here. And I look forward to doing this again anytime soon.
All righty. Willie Tejada from IBM, Chief Developer Advocate, as well as a whole bunch of other things. You'll see it in his title. Check out developer.ibm.com. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we've got the Haunted Hacker podcast hosted by Mike Jones. He talks to Alton Johnson, who is CEO of a new automated pen testing platform provider called Vonahi.io, and I'm sure that I mispronounced the name of the company, so I apologize, but let's give this conversation a listen.
Interested and is providing less value, right? And so I proposed the idea behind automated reporting. And, you know, a lot of people, when you think of automated reporting, you think of like canned text or like, you know, just the same duplicate stuff across multiple customers. But, you know, with Logic, you could basically tailor things to different people based on what you've seen in the pen test. So I never forget, I went on site on the West Coast and did a pen test and saw so much stuff that it was going to take me like 2 weeks to write the report. That was probably going to be the longest report in my career. And so rather than like spending all of that time, you know, copying and pasting the icons back and forward, asking this consultant, hey, do you have an updated finding for this and all that nonsense? I spent the entire week studying Word and Mail to like basically break down Word documents and build them back up to the point where I was able to do that pretty efficiently, and eventually had a reporting framework that was saving me more and more time over time. And so with the platform, basically, you know, when I decided to start it, I was like, well, when I think about it, there's a lot of things that I do. There's a lot of things that I do over and over and over when I go on site, some of the same things, right? A lot of pen testers have their host discovery techniques, whether it's, you know, ping sweeps, ARP scans, whatever the case is, they have a technique. And once they get that back, then things change, right? Depending on what you see open, things change based on that. So I know a lot of pen testers have their own tools to kind of automate a lot of things like OSINT, things like that. But I wanted to take that and, you know, escalate it to other things like, you know, actually exploiting things, getting the results, analyzing the results, figuring out if I need to go even further. And so that's pretty much how we got started. And when I first started the platform, you know, I kind of was like everybody else. Well, you know, automation, you still need a human. You probably can't do a lot of stuff, but I think as we've been able to prove it over time, you know, it really hits me like every month. I'm like, wow, we really automated that. It's crazy.
Yeah. I remember when Saint Exploit came out, they had kind of like a auto router built into their appliance. So it was sort of the same, along the same lines, but they didn't do the automated reporting. They didn't do, they didn't automate a lot of things, although it did do auto routing once it found vulnerable services or whatever. But you had to initiate scans. So how do you set yourself apart from, like, let's say Rapid7 or Nexpose or people like Saint Corporation?
Yeah. So, you know, I've done a lot of 1099 work for a lot of companies, at a few. I've got a lot of friends from Accuvant who have gone over to other companies. And so typically, you know, we try to, so I know automated pen testing is still like a new thing, right? You hear it, but you don't really believe it until you see it. And so we really try to, you know, push even further when it comes to exploitation, man-in-the-middle attacks, cracking hashes. We try to get that in people's faces so they can actually see that, hey, this is possible. Sometimes we'll come across a company who's like, yeah, you know, we use, you know, Nessus for this and, you know, Rapid7 tools for this. But then we show them like what we do in the product and the report and all of that. And it really sets it apart by automating the exploitation, the man-in-the-middle attacks, being able to do that intelligently without having to just massively like throw things out of every system. So, but yeah, we focus on like the efficiency, right? I know a lot of automated tools don't present like the best reports, and so we've spent a lot of time in making sure that the reports are actually valuable, right, at the end of the day. So also the efficiency, right? The time that it takes. I mean, we've taken an 8-hour reporting process and reduced it to like not having to do anything at all except QA it from time to time. So, but yeah, those are some of the things.
Very cool. So have you built like a community around the platform? Can people contribute, or, you know, is there an API? I mean, what else is there to the platform that you're going to share with the community?
Yeah, so right now we haven't done anything like as far as, you know, opening up any kind of projects to like the community just yet. But so right now we pretty much develop everything in-house. We control everything in-house, and we just let partners kind of get access to the tool to run it on our clients' networks. Yep.
Cool. So anybody else have any questions for Alton? Ryan, I think Ryan would start. So go ahead.
Hey man, sorry about that. Hey, so I was curious, with all the automation stuff that your company, can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With all the automation that you're doing with these processes, does that mean that you can run the team with less people? And if so, does that create opportunities for new guys to come in the ground level, or?
Yeah. So basically, all of the stuff that consultants typically do, like for the first few days or even weeks, depending on like how long the engagement is, they can use the platform to basically automate that ground level work, right? Rather than looking to see if the system has eternal blue, rather than spending the time even exploiting it, right? We could do that for them, and they can just basically take the results and be like, all right, well, let me look at some printers to see if there's some email addresses I can enumerate, and start looking at application stuff. So we take a lot of that work that they would typically do. I spend a lot of time analyzing and automating that.
That's sweet. So when you've got third parties coming in, how do you guarantee your quality of service for your product? Like, do you oversee the results that they then pass on to their clients, or how do you keep that brand, shiny?
Yeah. So when we first started the platform and we started automating the reporting process, we would typically QA every single report just to make sure that there are no like errors in the tools or something said it was vulnerable and it wasn't. And then over time, we've kind of went into a different process where we actually just like set flags depending on certain things that happen in the reports. So typically, if there's something that is kind of unusual across multiple engagements, we'll take a look at that to make sure that, the results are accurate. But otherwise, if it's like a very common, like attack surface between different customers, then we've set up processes already to automate like the QA of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure does. So third and last question, how do you let C-levels know like the return on investment for your service? Like, the automation thing it's not the traditional route they're used to going down. How do you explain to them like this is going to get rid of the low-hanging fruit and it's worth your money? Yeah. So I know a lot of times like executives, they spend like tens of thousands of dollars for a pen test, right? And it typically is like a 2-3 week turnaround depending on the engagement. And so one of the things that we talk about is the continuous model, right? So a lot of companies would do continuous pen testing, but it's just so expensive, right? Who's going to pay 10 grand every 3 months to do a pen test, right? That's just it's just a little bit too much. So we like to kind of mention that, we could, because we're automating things, we can take the price down significantly, which would allow you to do more of a continuous pen test, right? So if you do a pen test in January, something comes out significant in February, right? Maybe Nessus won't see it because it requires authentication and they're not doing authenticated scanning. Or if we do a pen test and let's say we were able to exploit something, then we could see that before your next annual pen test. So I think the continuous model really kind of hits home for a lot of executives. Yeah, I think it's really good what you're doing because it brings down that entry level to actual quality pen testing. Like, so smaller businesses can have this service available to them as well. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yep, we appreciate it. Definitely.
With HP, we did a lot of going into companies and building their red teams for them. And if we would have had an automated platform to take care of the pen testing side of it, could have gotten deeper with the actual red teaming and threat intel. Because a lot of those tasks you're talking about, like the scanning, like if you go into an ISP and you're doing it like internal pen test and you have, 20 net blocks, you're looking at a week of scanning, it's not something you can babysit 24 hours a day. Expensive, expensive. I did one up in Rochester, New York for an ISP, and the amount of IP addresses that we had was just insane. And they wanted everything covered. So with a platform like that, that would make things a lot easier, just set things to go and fire. And another good bonus point, and I think it will sell to any pen tester, is the fact that the reporting, right? So I don't know a single tester that loves pen testing and doing reports. Like the pen testing, but the reporting, no. And especially when you get into like FedRAMP, right? You do FedRAMP assessments and what's sorry? FedRAMP is like a government kind of a pen test that rates them if you're a government service provider. And it's all government compliance and databases and check marks, and it's a nightmare. But the reporting for that, it takes weeks. Yeah. And with the reporting, I mean, I know we all can relate to like spending all of this time on a report, submitting it to QA. QA is like, this should be a medium. You changed it to a medium. Oh, you forgot to add, adjust the chart. Like, who really wants to deal with that? You know what I mean? And then you get some of them that want to argue the findings. Even though it's the CVE says this and it's a critical, they want to argue the findings for another 2 weeks. So
yeah, or if they didn't update it, or they updated it and they didn't send it out, and you got to find out who has a finding for this. That's ridiculous, you know?
Yeah. Now, if we can just get like a clone of me or you and have them talk to the client as well, we'll be done, man. So where do you see the industry going from here? You know, I hear a lot of people tossing around the buzzword AI and machine learning and stuff like that. I'm from the thought school that true AI doesn't exist yet. We're still looking for that. And I think it'll be a while before we see that in our industry where it's truly AI. So where do you see it going from here as far as pen testing, and how far do you want to see automation taken?
Yeah. So I think it's been very interesting over the last few years when it comes to automation. Like if you Google automated pen testing like once every 6 months, you'll be surprised at like how many different companies are trying to get into it. And so I think like a lot of the bigger companies who are spending, a lot of money on salaries, and then the clients are spending a lot of money on those engagements, they're really going to see it kind of hit, in a few years when you start to see a lot more companies, start to get more market share, when it comes to pen testing. And so, and again, just kind of going back to like all those manual tasks, you're going to see pen testers who are working at companies get tired of reporting, and they're going to go out and build their own thing, or they're going to, are they going to learn how or get somebody to help them out or something? So I feel like, especially at the pace that things come out these days, vulnerabilities and you forget to check something else because you're paying attention to this. So I think we're going to see a lot more automation in place in the next few years when it comes to pen testing, because it's so expensive. And it's not fair that smaller companies can't afford it because they're so expensive. So they're just targets sitting out there, hoping for the best. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think when you talk about targets sitting out there, that brings up another point. Let's talk about SolarWinds. And let's talk about, what's happened since then and, how important it is to get a real pen test and to actually look at the data and try not to fight the data. I think with SolarWinds, we're seeing a lot of people. I know there's a lot more affected that's actually coming out and saying it. But also with the Florida Water Treatment Center, if they would have been doing routine pen tests, they would have seen that TeamViewer was probably very vulnerable, because I doubt they've patched it since last August. So, let's talk about that and how the tool reports the vulnerabilities, right? Because I know a lot of tools will just report the vulnerability in the day it came out. One thing that I wanted to see in a tool is a breakdown of when that client or when that company that created the tool thinks that vulnerability should be remediated in what window, 30, 60, 90. A lot of people set their own scoring system internally for time frame for patching. But I think with a pen tester, it would be really cool to be able to put that in a report and say, hey, look, this has been out since last June. And you're way past the 90-day window, and this is a critical, more validation on that vulnerability. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Because a lot of companies, they're just on vulnerability scans, and they see vulnerabilities, but it don't really mean anything to them just yet, right? They see it, but they're like, yeah, we'll get to it. They don't really know what the potential impact is just doing a vulnerability assessment. The vulnerability assessment just says, hey, this is vulnerable. It's pretty bad. If somebody was to exploit it, then it could be real. It could be even more bad, right? But with the pen test, they could actually take that, right, and actually demonstrate the impact. Like when you show somebody, access to confidential data, social security numbers, credit, PII, that hits home a lot harder than saying that, hey, if somebody was to exploit something, this could happen. So I think, that's really the value that we try to provide in the pen test is, hey, this is really bad. I know Nessa said, this might be a medium, but this is how we took that medium and we actually did something with it. Here's your password, by the way.
It's funny you say that, because a lot of those tools actually don't take in consideration the environment around it. Right. So it'll see a vulnerability and be like, oh, this is a low, but the way that they have the network architected, it could absolutely be like a medium or vice versa. Yeah, exactly. So that's another thing that pen testers I know have had issues with clients before, explaining the criticality of vulnerabilities, and you really can't fight with a CVE score. But I always tell a client, here's the vulnerability, and you have to look at and analyze it and see if it falls within your acceptable risk profile.
Right.
If it does, great. At least you know about it and it's there on paper. I've done my job.
Exactly.
So yeah, like I think that's some of the big pain points for pen testers. That, and we've always been kind of automating to a certain extent. I wouldn't say automating, but maybe scripting, tying tools together, looking for open ports, and then probing those ports. Just stringing that together with Bash script, just on the fly. And a lot of companies actually look for that when they're hiring pen testers, is the ability to write on the fly or create something to help the work get easier. Is that something that you thought about when you were building this tool, or was it, this was something you wanted to break away and go do, or was it something that helps you do your job and it became something bigger than you thought?
Yeah, kind of like, kind of like a lot of tools out there. Like you eventually write a small piece of script that does something, and then, next thing you know, you run it and it's like, then you start to do the next thing manually. And you're like, I wonder if I could expand it there. So that's kind of how I started off with me. It was like, well, I wonder if I could just automate reporting. And then I got bored of that. So I was like, all right, so we got that out the way, right? I wonder if I could, automate this. All right, done that. And then I think the more manual stuff that, we find ourselves doing, the more we want to try to, automate that. And that's kind of just how it is. And you combine that with the fact that I love coding. And it's just, I forget what day it is, at the end of that.
Very cool. Jeremy, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, so I know in the industry, because I get asked this so many times when we do a call, people are always asking, well, what's the difference between a vulnerability scan and a penetration test? Is it just me, or is that like a common confusion in the industry between those two? I know, like, for industries that are regulated, I mean, those guys, they know the difference, right? But your typical small to medium sized business, I get asked that question a lot, and I'm always trying to find creative ways to explain it. So I'm just curious to see if you guys run into that same challenge, and like, what analogies do you use to like clearly get the point across so that when you're explaining it to a non-tech person, they get the difference and they understand the importance of each.
Yeah. So, one of my analogies is, and I know it's probably lame, but it works. But I like to say, a vulnerability assessment will walk up to the house and say, hey, it'll knock on the door, it'll twist the doorknob and say, it'll crack the door open a little bit. The door is unlocked. And then it'll call up the person and say, hey, your door is unlocked. If somebody goes in there, they might find all kinds of stuff, right? And the person's like, oh yeah, I leave the door unlocked all the time. It's never happened. But the pen test is more like, hey, your door's unlocked. And by the way, I got your car keys. I got your Lamborghini. Everything that you love, is in my backseat right now. So I like to use that because it paints the picture that vulnerability assessments tell you something's bad, but the pen test actually takes that, show it, and finds all the good stuff. Yep, the stuff that will keep you up at night.
Yep. And it normally does too. Ryan, do you have anything?
Yeah, man. So did your company also do end user education, like phishing education, stuff like that, to bring the whole company's security posture up, or are you just strictly pen testing?
Yeah, so we do offer like some traditional assessment, like wireless assessments, application assessments, mobile assessments. I actually built a platform called Ipv6. Actually, that was the first product that we built, and so we're a small business, and so that was like the first thing I built. And I realized that phishing, like building another phishing platform, is it doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's so much stuff out there that does it already and for free. And so we have something that we can help. Like if somebody wants to do a phishing assessment, we can, pair something like that up with that. And then we also have some partners as well that help us out with providing training and education to some of the users like after phishing assessment. But we don't do it directly, but we do have some partners that do the education side of it.
Very cool. Like KnowBe4, that type of company?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to know what was the craziest. So you also did red teaming, right? Which is a combination of everything. It's just whatever tricks you've got in the hat, just try to get into my company and find something sensitive. So what was like the craziest red team engagement or operation that you were a part of?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that always comes to mind is, and it's kind of funny because me and the contact actually still communicate today, and this happened like 5 years ago. One of the assessments that we were doing, we were trying to get access into the building as part of like the scope and what we were doing, and so we weren't really successful. Well, we were successful actually at the other buildings, and there was the last one that was like super secure, had all these security guards, very intimidating, right? You would literally walk there and turn around because you would be like, that's not going to happen. So this part made me nervous because I went up, and a lot of people get nervous on on-site social engineering engagement. You know, what's going to happen? What are you going to ask me? You know, things like that. But right before that day, I got into a scenario where somebody didn't hear like the badge reader go off when I walked in behind them, and they caught me, and they were like, hey, you know, I didn't hear anything go off. So that night I went on YouTube, found a guy doing RFID hacking, found the sound, you know, and I clipped the sound, just the sound, put it on my phone. And then the next day I went to that last location, and I literally walked in, and I had like my ID just like, you know, just in my hand, just kind of like this. And I pressed the play button as I did that, like behind them. But I had to like delete every other song on my phone, right? Because I didn't want like, you know, Rick Ross stuff playing.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah. But that was very...
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So the file, and also people like probably need to know too, is that you can make your own audio file as well, right, just by recording the signal, and you can build that into a Raspberry Pi on a small antenna and go to town. That's really cool.
This is the creativity of hackers that I love to hear about.
So
I got another one that might be interesting too.
Go ahead.
So we're doing this was like more of a scope-based engagement, but we had on-site social engineering, and then we also had wireless assessments, and then like internal network pen testing in scope. So I spent the morning, you know, trying to figure out where people are going, you know, leaving and things like that. And I managed to get inside of a building and got inside the break room, just kind of walking around and, you know, just seeing who's going to catch me. After a period of time, like nobody caught me. And I was like, well, I wonder if I could just do the wireless assessment while I'm here, you know? I mean, I'm in the building. I mean, you know, why should I call a client and say, hey, meet me down here? Let me just get started now, save some time. So at that point, I didn't care if I got caught because I had already accomplished the goal, which was to get in and, you know, plug into the network, things like that. So I actually found like a cubicle that was, you know, nobody was in there. And I got bold. I started setting up my wireless equipment, got the antennas going, the alpha adapter.
Nice.
And I literally completed the wireless assessment like at that time. And so it was like an hour and a half later, a group of security guys walk up and they, you know, I see them coming. It's a team of them. I'm just like, oh man, like I hope they're just going to get coffee or something, right? And they stop at a desk, and they're just looking at me like, who are you? And I like froze up, right? They brought me up to the front, tried to call my primary point of contact. He wouldn't answer the phone. I almost died, like, you know, at that time. So that was also another crazy moment. Yeah.
We had a bus, a metro line in downtown Houston, Houston bus station, and I would take a bus from one side of town all the way to the other at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So I knew the bus drivers were kind of tired. So you have an app, and you can buy your tickets online. And the only thing that shows it's a valid ticket is this bus that's animated and it has a date, right? So I just went in there and did my own little animation and changed the date, and I rode free for like a month. But I just want to see if I could do it. Wouldn't I needed to? It's just like, can I get around this? You know, like this is ridiculous.
Exactly.
Kind of goes back to Alton when he was like 11 or 12. It's like you're doing it just to see if you can do it, right?
Right. Yep.
You guys are like kids trying to like push the buttons and see what your limit is.
That's the curiosity is what forms us into who we are, really.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember I was 3 or 4, and my grandmother had a tear gas gun in her closet, and I was always a kid that was plundering and getting in trouble and, you know, getting into stuff. And they were in one part of the house and I heard the gun go off, and they come in there. I shot myself in the face with a tear gas gun at a little age, but I was just like shocked that it worked. I was like, oh, cool. So yeah, like, you know, they get you into trouble as well.
Yeah.
So does anybody have questions for Alton? I'm looking at the chat. The chat's open. All the messages, questions will come to the host, and I'll relay it on to Alton. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box.
Can you walk me through a social engineering engagement? Like, do they outline a scope for it, or is it open slather? Can you just like pretend to be Hugo, the pool cleaner, or like what's the go?
Yeah, so the first 2 years of my career, I did a lot of on-site social engineering assessments for banks and credit unions. They were really targeting banks and credit unions. And so the common thing for us was pest control, right? You walk in, you just start doing your thing. We had like a fake invoice sheet. We had a fake ID. We put on like khaki, like khaki pants and just look like a pest inspector kind of person. And so we would just walk in there and just start like looking around and taking notes and stuff like that. And just, we'll keep an eye out trying to see where where there's an unattended, room is. Right. And we'll just eventually get there and we'll just stand there for a little minute and we'll, take pictures. Hey, here's the proof for me getting access to the network, the network jack. And then, we did that a lot. But yeah, they're very scary sometimes. So. But
what's really cool too is if you go to eBay and you can find like UPS uniforms, you can find Verizon work shirts, and man, eBay was my friend when it came to social engineering. We got into an AT&T data center and said we need to fix some servers, and we had Verizon work shirts on. And they actually gave us like let us in because we had the right badge. We had scoped out the badges, but we're in a totally competing like T-shirt. Some people they just don't think that's the weakest link.
It's so crazy. Oh,
you got it.
It's so crazy when you think of on-site social engineering. You think of like physically going on site and trying to get access to something that only authorized people should be having access to. It sounds crazy. The first thing most people would think is, man, never. I couldn't see myself walking inside a Chase Bank and getting access behind a teller line. But it's so surprising when you actually do it. Yep. People are afraid to confront you and say, hey, who are you? And like out of like, I don't know, maybe 80 on-site social engineering assessments, I've only had like a handful of people actually walk up to me and ask me what I was supposed to, what was I doing there? So it's crazy.
Yeah. Red teaming is a lot of fun too, because you get to mix in all the aspects, social engineering, physical, and you get to do some complex attacks. And that, to me, red teaming is where the passion's at. That's where I like to be is red teaming. Ethical hacking, pen testing is okay. I do that for money in the bank, whatever. But, the real passion would definitely be formulating an all around collaborative attack scenario, red teaming. But you're right, especially like back in the day, banking was really important when it came to social engineering. I worked for one of the big banks in the US and we were constantly doing testing our own stuff. Let's see.
So it looks like Frenchie's got a question. He's saying, how are you refining and teaching the AI that they are building with the system to fine tune and not have things slip through the cracks? So yeah, Alton, why don't you talk about, I know you're deploying VPN tests in a bunch of different environments. So how do you add new exploits so that the tool continues to kind of be smarter for like the next customer? How do you integrate, so how does the tool get smarter? Tell us how that works, right?
Yeah, so,
I think I phrased that question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically, whenever it comes to like our automated platform, I always like to kind of bring it back to traditionally, right? If you're a consultant, you go on site, you run a tool or you try a new exploit and you get different results, you're going to learn, oh, wow, this is different. Maybe I should be on the lookout for this next time, or I should, so using this tool and start grepping for this string or whatever. So it's pretty much the same way, right? Whenever we, integrate new things into the product, well, first of all, we test it to make sure it works. We don't want to just like start, throwing up zero logging on everybody's DCs without, without testing things. So, but we also set a lot of flags too. So whenever there's things that, that don't commonly get exploited because those vulnerabilities aren't really that common in those particular networks, we usually jump in the middle of the pen testing and just to look at the results, and we learn from that, and we can adapt, like, change the code on the fly, and even of course in development, so that next time that scenario happens, we know how to adjust to it. If it's like post-exploitation or, escalation of privileges, lateral movement, we can actually set breakpoints all throughout the process to make sure that everything runs perfectly smooth. And, once we've done that a few, more and more enough times, then we can start to remove some of those breakpoints so that we can set breakpoints later down the road when it comes to like extracting data.
So when it comes to the platform itself, you're only doing network right now, right?
Exactly.
You haven't gotten into Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, any of that stuff.
No, but I think we'll probably end up automating wireless testing. It's so easy. It's one of those things you can write a checklist for somebody and they can go and do it. You know, the craziest part about wireless testing is getting the alpha adapter to even work. You know, once you've got it working, you're good to go.
Yeah, the chipset is the hardest thing, especially like I do a lot of testing with Raspberry Pis. And so sometimes the chipset can be a little finicky. That was one of my biggest questions was, you know, modularity. You know, you're going to be able to add SDR or RF or Bluetooth and stuff like that. Wi-Fi should not be a problem. It should be super easy. Yeah. Maybe even Bluetooth because it's pretty much the same technology, just a little dumber. So I don't know. It'd be cool to see how things evolve over the next 5-10 years. Now, is your company VC funded or no, strictly financed through your means? That's awesome.
Just me. Just took my savings and went at it.
That's awesome.
I wish it was like that. But
That's awesome.
Yep. Just, you know, like, so I worked at a company that had a lot of VC funding, and like, it became like all about paying the investors back. Mm-hmm. And we started putting out crap reports, crap stuff, and we weren't training people. It was just a disaster. And I know that's not all that it's all about, but that was kind of like some of my exposure to it. Mm-hmm. And so when I started my company, and I wasn't really educated on like, who do I even go to ask for anything, right? So I just basically took my savings at the time and just went at it. I remember the last day of my last job, I literally got a laptop, my personal laptop, because I was using the company laptop, and say, I don't care what happens. As long as I have my laptop, I'll be fine. So I got clothes, I have my laptop, I'll be good. I'll figure out a way to make it work. So that's pretty much the attitude I had.
Yeah. So when I say VC, I know that Ryan had a question. It's actually a venture capital. They're the people who sometimes finance startup companies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. What I found with startups is that when they did have VC backing, the different rounds, things got really critical. Right. And it seemed like we were always chasing to satisfy the investors instead of actually working freely on the product and enjoying what we're doing.
Exactly.
So I try to stay away from VC companies just because of that specific reason. I like to have fun.
Exactly. The vision, you've got a vision for an idea, and then with the VC comes in, and then you lose control of that ultimately, or.
Yeah, advisory board, VC funders. I mean, everybody kind of plays a part in it. If you have an extended executive team to help you get through M&A, merger and acquisition.
Yeah, and there's like milestones you've got to hit too. So you find that like, whereas if you were, self-funded, 100% of your time goes towards product development and growing your business. Whereas the moment you get funded, about 30% of your time now gets sucked away in doing board presentations and, forecasting and projections so that you can present to these people that are giving you all this money that you have a plan in place. So it does take a lot of time away from the core of what you're trying to achieve, I think. Yeah. But at the same time, that capital, I mean, getting like a $2.5 million funding could definitely help you grow, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like a double-edged sword for me, and I see the pros and cons for both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Alton, if you got that $2.5 million funding, where would you go? Where would you expand your business? What would be the first ticket item on the list?
Yeah, I think for us, it would be developers. They're super expensive. They're kind of hit or miss. I feel like for, like marketing, sales, we've been really good at like expanding our team in those areas, and we find good people and things that, when it comes, I don't know what it is, but developers. And so here's the thing too, like, and this has been interesting. So I wanted to automate pen testing, but the minute we put a dashboard to it, we realized that, oh my goodness, this was going to be a product thing, right? Like everybody was going to be all about the UI. So I think we would definitely pour some into that because, I find myself like kind of, looking at more stuff in the front end than I do with the back end. So I think we could definitely, we could do a lot we have a pretty cool product, but I think
But it's crazy though that you say that, because as a pen tester, I don't like the front end. I would much rather deal with the data. I don't need the nonsense. And a lot of companies, not to put names to people who put like these crazy UIs together and suck up bandwidth and lock up systems, but they look pretty, and little pew pictures back and forth are cool. But I would much rather see like the advanced search data, the raw data.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. When some of the questions that we get on some of our demos are pretty shocking, because it's a dashboard, like the assumptions just go through the roof. It's like, do you do AI? Can it flush my toilet? Can I turn my light on by logging into the dashboard and clicking the button? So but it's very interesting. But I mean, it's crazy because that stuff really attracts a lot of businesses, even though we know as pen testers that, the real stuff. Exactly. They just like the bells, the charts and the whistles,
I'll tell you where it goes. And I learned this in my last company with my CISO. He was very open about it. But any tool that has a dashboard, we had one specifically that the VC funders that we had actually funded them as well. So we were kind of forced to have their service, and it looked at like open web ports and that score or whatever. I'm sure you know the company I'm talking about. But those metrics on that site became the reasons if or not executives got bonuses. So anytime they see a dashboard with colors or numbers, it doesn't matter what it is, it becomes some sort of metric.
Right.
And that's what drives me crazy. The real information, what you really need to get to is past the front end. And it's really in the data. So I got into a habit of when I give the CISO a report, I wouldn't give him something out of the UI. I would give him the data and be like, here's what's going on. He said, well, can't you put a picture to it? And I was like, no, it's black and white. It's right there. So yeah, the dashboards serve a purpose, for analysts, maybe to take a quick look. But as far as as far as relying on it to like show you the real health or whatever, I think it's kind of misleading. And the whole red, green, and orange color certification for terrorism and for internet, cybercrime, bad idea.
Exactly.
There was another question. Does your automation pen test tool align with frameworks such as NIST, for example? I know that we talked about that. It falls right in line with NIST, right?
Yeah. So just to expound on it a little bit too. So basically when I built the platform, it was literally just to automate the same things a pen tester was doing, the exact same thing. Like no pen tester that I know literally like compares their knowledge with any framework. They just know how to get things done and they do it. So that's kind of where we started things off. But as we started, kind of like, I guess making more and more progress, we realized that, all right, well, now we can start to tie some things into it. So like, for example, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I know a lot of companies who are, who use the MITRE ATT&CK framework are usually like attack sim tools that are based on it. But rather than being based on like these frameworks, we're actually just tying the similarities between the results from these frameworks. We're not trying to like build something that's completely on this framework or completely on that one. But if we do have stuff that relate to them that we can provide, and we can provide that extra value to the customer in the report, then we'll do that.
There's another one. My question is, what are the most common vulnerabilities that Alden and the team find? Based on those common vulnerabilities, what are some key recommendations for businesses to help protect their networks, patching, lack of basic hardening or of builds, et cetera? And that comes from Steve. Steve is a leader in security in a bank in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, appreciate the question too, Steve. So one of the things that I see a lot, and it's crazy that it still exists, is like Ipv6 DNS poisoning. Right, I wrote a blog about that a while back, and also LNMNR as well, and MBNS. So basically, most pen testers, and probably still, well, most likely still today, when they, I was about to say go on site. Nobody's gone on site today, but when most pen testers get started, the first thing they're doing is they're firing up Responder, right? They're firing up Responder. They're firing up Man-in-the-Middle 6, because these are very, very easy tools to run to exploit very, I guess, common vulnerabilities. And you can get a lot of good stuff from it if it's not configured properly. So just a little bit of background about the DNS poisoning, LNMNR. Basically, they're relying on DNS, right? So when a computer is trying to resolve a DNS name, they have a series of processes that they check. They check their local host file, right? They check their DNS server. If the DNS server has no idea and that system is configured to use like NetBIOS and LNMNR, they're basically going to broadcast on that local subnet, hey, does anybody know the IP address to whatever the DNS name that I'm trying to get to? Well, as an attacker using a tool like Responder, I can respond to that request and say, hey, I'm the IP address that you're looking for. And so what happens is, depending on what that request is trying to authenticate to, like a web service or, SQL database or whatever, I can fake that server to that client. And now I can, prompt him for authentication credentials, and I could either get clear text or hash credentials. So that's something that we see a lot, right? And you can turn these things off in group policy. You could set up, like if you have EDR solutions, you can set up, different controls to basically look for these types of packets going across the network. The other thing too is IPv6, right? So IPv6 was enabled by default since Windows Vista. And basically the way that works is if a workstation sees that an IPv6 DHCP server, DHCP-v6 server is available, they're going to ask that server for an IP address, an IPv6 address, right? And so as an attacker, I can basically go into any network and stand up a DHCP server that's giving out IPv6 addresses. And your workstations are going to prefer it over IPv4. And because of that, I can give it my IP address for the DNS server, and it'll work kind of just like the last one, right? Whenever that computer goes out to do anything, resolve a DNS name, it's going to ask me. And that's so in terms of remediation with that, I know like there are some switches that have things like DCP guard, right? So you can basically whitelist authorized DHCP servers. And so if anybody else on the network tries to assign an IP address to somebody, then essentially that'll get stopped at the switch. So those are the very two common issues that I see, and it's been like that for years too.
Yeah, I still have a LAN turtle, but that was the first thing I would do is fire up Responder and WPAD.
Right.
Everybody was spitting something at the device. So exactly. Let's talk Go bags, right? So I know as a pen tester, we all have our Go kits, right? So what does your Go bag consist of?
So for me, like just in terms of like a bunch of like some of the common tools that I'm always using. So definitely Responder, Man in the Middle 6, of course, Mpacket, right? Mpacket has a crap ton of tools that are very useful. SMB client, WMI exec, SMB exec. So I like to have that handy as well. Intel and Relay, also part of Mpacket. So I would say Mpacket probably has a lot of the stuff that I use most commonly, but I would say the top three were Responder, Man in the Middle 6, and some of the stuff in Mpacket for like Intel and Relay attacks.
Yeah, for sure. So do you have lockpick set and anything else like?
Physical stuff too. I have the USB rubber ducky. I had some fun with that many years ago. We haven't done a lot of physical assessments lately, but I've got some flash drives just to drop like some Excel spreadsheets on it with some macros to ship out if I need to. I have the Raspberry Pi, which we could use it for actually as a VPN test agent. So we can deploy those out as well to get remote access. I'm trying to think. I have the Alpha cards, but we haven't really done a lot of not physical, but like wireless assessments since COVID. I think that's really it. That's really about it. Yeah.
So have you gotten into any RF? Like, do you have a ham radio license, or are you looking to dive off into RF at all?
I haven't. I've got some friends that are pretty deep into it, but I haven't myself though.
Gotcha. Ryan's asking if I have a cam in his house because I'm asking all the questions that he's writing down right now.
Yep. Yeah, I used to have a bunch of stuff when I was doing a lot of different types of engagements, but I think since starting Vana High and just kind of like really honing in on pen testing, I've kind of lost. I don't even know where half the stuff is, like the stuff I just named. I have like my Raspberry Pi sitting on my desk, but I don't even know where everything else is.
Oh, yeah, my desk is a mess. I've got like 2 Raspberry Pis and a bunch of antennas, and it's cluttered. It's bad.
Yeah, I got a backpack in the closet somewhere.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay, hypothetically, if you had an opening at Vana High for an entry-level position, what would you be looking for in the candidate? Like what skills would make you go, yes, that's my guy?
Yeah, I like that question too, because this kind of dives into a little bit of education. I know a lot of people who want to get into cybersecurity have the same question, but so I know a while back, degrees were like something that everybody just looked at and were like, oh, doesn't have a degree, you're not qualified. You have a degree, you're qualified. Like me personally, not having a degree and just kind of taking like a non-traditional route, I really can respect like the hard work that people put into like just learning themselves, right? So for me, I like to look at, I like to know their story, like, right, how did they get to where they are? What kind of person, like, in terms of personality, because we all know there's a lot of pen testers out there who are great technically, but wow, you try to have a conversation with them and it's just, you don't know if the guy hates you or if he loves you because he's not expressing any emotion, right? So we really like embrace like a good person, right? Like a good person.
Mike's always
right?
saying that you wanna work with someone you can trust, and part of that trust is getting to know them as a person, right, Mike?
Yeah. I've been known to be one of those guys who have been kind of a pain in the ass, though. So I totally get what he's saying.
What? You're so charming. What are you talking about?
Yeah, let me tell you.
You put a lot of trust into these people. How do you know who's worthy of that trust? Like you're hiring someone to get into the nitty gritty of a client's business. Like how do you sleep at night?
You drop $100 bill by their desk and walk off.
Yeah. So there's two different sides of it. Like there's like the culture side, can they blend in with the company? Are they a great person? Things like that. And then there's what you're saying, like in terms of like the technical ability, right? So when it comes to like the technical like qualifications, I like to kind of see what they've done in the past. Like, do they have tools on GitHub, right? Have they taken any courses? I don't care about the certification because, that's, you can cheat to do that. But like, I like to know, have they been through any courses that were, teaching them something? So I like to kind of see, do they know Python? Do they know Ruby? Are they going to be an efficient pen tester, right? Do they know any language at all to help them, like adapt on the fly? So I think those are some of the common ones, because if you can't code as a pen tester, then what happens when Metasploit throws an error and it's just a typo?
And that's a pain because I remember starting out like first messing with like tools like that, and I would look at the command line. I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't that work? And I go back and check it. But one thing about open source tools is the documentation is not always the greatest.
Yeah, horrible.
So a command that may have worked 2 versions ago may not work this time. So and it goes to show like being a pen tester and being able to work on the fly. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to figure out. Like that shit's it's not in a book. You have to do some troubleshooting.
Exactly.
I know Cham had a question. Cham, you're unmuted, so if you want to ask your question, shoot away.
Oh, okay. Hi, Alton. So my question is, so your company does automated testing as opposed to manual penetration testing. How did you gain trust from clients when you started your company?
Yes. Oh, that's a good question. So when I first started Vanahai, right? So, well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. It was never my intention to start a company, right? I just had an idea and nobody listened to my idea. So I had no choice but to do this. And so when I first started Vanahai, I was just a pen tester with a lot of experience on a lot of stuff, but I didn't really know how to market and sell myself. And I found out that it was extremely competitive. Everybody's doing pen testing. Everybody is a 1099 contractor. And so when it came to the automation side of things, and I think the fact that, I have tools in Metasploit, I have tools in Kali Linux, I have a ton of tools on GitHub, and, there's things that people can go to our website and see that we're not just a company saying, hey, we do automated pen testing and, here it is. So they have a little bit of, there's some reputation behind that, but also like the demo, I know a lot of people say, still probably not really, but I always tell them to hop on a call. Like, let's get on the demo and let's show you. Like, and by the end of the demo, they're like, this report looks better than our last report. We spent, $15,000 on it. And so, I know, I told you,
Hey, Alton, can we offer a free trial to everyone on the Haunted Hacker podcast so they can try out the platform if they want to hack their own network, just like a limited trial so that they can just see how easy it is to schedule a pen test. We'll get with Mike after and we can send them like a special link and they can just try it out for free.
Awesome.
Exactly. And also too,
number of your stylist, because man, your photo on GitHub is pimping.
I gotta check this out.
Thanks. But it's so good.
So everyone should just go hack their own network.
Oh, Alan looking kind of Hollywood there.
And I try to do a little something, a little.
Guys, that's my graphic skills, right?
Oh, I cut you up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cham, do you have any more questions for Alton?
CISO Talk. to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up is our Something Old segment. We have a previously enjoyed conversation from Predict 2021 with Ron and Cindy Gula about cybersecurity in general and how 2021 may be the year that cybersecurity rebrands itself to attract more talent and increase engagement across all of society. So let's give it a listen.
I'm Ron Gula, and this is Cindy Gula.
Hi, very nice to see everyone.
We are very excited to be here virtually at Predict 2021. We are going to talk a little bit about how we got here from a cybersecurity point of view and what we can do as an industry to kind of broaden our scope. Cindy and I are going to talk a little bit about a concept called data care, and we're going to talk a little bit about current events. You ready, Cindy?
I'm all set. Let's go.
Excellent. So sorry we can't be here in person, but a little bit about our background. So Cindy and I run Gula Tech Adventures. We invest in cybersecurity companies. We invest in technology and people to help attract more people to the cybersecurity industry. And we also do a good bit with nonprofits. Cindy and I started the Gula Tech Foundation. Cindy, you want to just say a minute or two on the Gula Tech Foundation?
Yeah, the Gula Tech Foundation is very similar to investing in for-profit companies because nonprofits are doing great work out there on the mission. How they use their funds that they get is different. But the idea of the foundation is to really try to attract more people to cybersecurity. Sometimes enterprise companies are all about making that profit, whereas nonprofits are about making a difference. And workforce development ideas, there's all sorts of different ways. And we really look at the foundation and treating it as investing in companies just happen to be in the nonprofit area. And we're looking forward to do competitive grants and really try to make sure that the cybersecurity industry is aware that these nonprofits exist so that they can help push forward their mission and allow the nonprofit area to attract and be a stepping stone for more people to enter cybersecurity.
That's well said. And you're watching this right now towards the end of January. During the month of January, we're actually accepting grant proposals, grant applications for cybersecurity nonprofits that increase engagement for African Americans throughout all of cybersecurity. So that's going on right now. So if you know of any, please encourage them to apply. You can go over to gula.tech and check that out.
And if you happen to be watching this after January, we are going to continue different themes for the foundation to be able to continue the mission of cyber nonprofits.
All right. So you're here today at the Predict 2021 conference. Who could have predicted how we got here? And who could have predicted kind of what situations we were in right now? And since my camera's not switching, I'm just going to look into that. See, it's live, but it's also virtual, right? So 2020 was dominated by COVID. We all worked from home. We all did cybersecurity from home, but we all sort of realized how much we are connected to each other and how much as an individuals we are dependent upon cybersecurity. We all had Zoom meetings with our teachers and our kids. We all became the IT shop for our home operations. And we also realized how much we were dependent upon things. And we were glued all throughout 2020 to all the different events that happened, including the election that just occurred. So where are we going from a cybersecurity point of view? Well, it's really important to realize that there were many trends that were kind of coming to a head in 2020. We had the culmination of the cyberspace solarium, which actually was a really good bipartisan. I say actually because there's been many previous sort of government studies of cybersecurity didn't go anywhere, but there was actually some really good thought. Not only from Republicans, but also from Democrats, but from industry, from the DoD. And they came together with a whole bunch of recommendations for items to pass that would actually make a difference in cybersecurity. Some of them are very tactical things, such as increasing election security or making power vendors, anybody who's in the defense industrial base, producing information, producing systems, making them responsible for those vulnerabilities. Other things were things like giving CISA the ability to do warrants to go into ISPs and hunt our adversaries. Unfortunately, almost immediately when the cyberspace solarium was published, COVID hit. And frankly, as much as we're thrilled to be in cybersecurity's done great things for us and done great things for our whole industry. Nobody really gets killed, no buildings get blown up, and we do need to take care of ourselves. So the priority became, let's heal the nation, let's cure COVID, let's stay safe. Having said that, though, now that we have a cure in sight, we're starting to see a refocus on cybersecurity. Just recently, the NDAA was passed, and it had a lot of these measures that the cyberspace solarium talked about put into actual law, including things such as having the White House having a cybersecurity coordinator. And actually, at this point, it's been public that Ann Neuberger from the NSA Cyber Directorate is going to be joining the National Security Council in the Biden administration, and this will provide much more coordination. And I don't know that I'm going to say that Ann Neuberger is going to be the Dr. Fauci of cybersecurity, but the reality is that we don't have a single cheerleader. We don't have a single person who's in control or who's got a message that can, command the attention of both the nation, our parents, our children, our educators, and really try to get that word out there. So I do think that one of the big trends that 2020 is setting us up for as an industry is how cybersecurity is going to be handled in the Biden administration. I think there's going to be more regulation. There's going to be more opportunity to bring more people into this industry. And there's going to be more opportunities for technologies, both open source and commercial and services, to kind of really reassert themselves as far as how they're working. But some things are really never going to change. As much as we have an embarrassment of riches, I mean, we're very happy to work on technology companies and invest in sort of that next generation of companies. We really still have some really big problems with cybersecurity. There's a lot of folks out there who look like me. They're white dudes. And this creates a lack of diversity, not only in just opportunity for the nation, but also a lack of diversity in thought. And a lot of times when we talk about the word diversity, we talk about skin color. But the reality is we need a diversity of ideas. We need to take the best from the federal government and the DoD, the best from open source and academia, and the best that's been done out there, and bring all those ideas out there. And we also need to do a better job inspiring people outside of the cybersecurity industry to have not only personal responsibility and how they protect their information and their data, but also, what can we do as a nation to kind of defend each other? And something that Cindy kind of came up with, and she's going to talk about, is this concept of broadening the industry to something called data care.
Yeah, so data care really came about when I got asked a lot as a woman. My degree's in engineering, so but there's constantly, how do we get more women in cyber? And I looked around and I said, you know what? I wouldn't go into cyber knowing what I know today. Even knowing what I know today, I wouldn't go into cyber. Why? Because we're pitching it like, oh, here, you, like Atlas, put the entire world on your shoulders, walk in your hoodie all by yourself and go fight or nation states. That's an incredibly large and big idea, but that's not the reality. The reality, there are so many subsets and areas and industries and just techniques that we need a lot of different people in a much smaller area to work on. And so when you really kind of boil it down, what are we doing in cybersecurity? We're protecting data. And if we really leverage what the healthcare did. Previous, when I was growing up, it was the medical field. Do you want to go into the medical field? But when they pivoted to healthcare, it made it personal. It made a lot more people be able to approach healthcare and understand it. You don't necessarily need to be a doctor to be in healthcare. You can be a nurse, you can be an administrator, you can go into the legal field, you can go into insurance. But people started advocating for their health in a different way than they were able to do when it was the medical field. So if we pivot and start calling it data care, now what we're doing is we're making it personal. It's about privacy. And then it's about who is protecting my data, who has access to it, who gets to store it and keep it. And then are you going to do as an industry to protect my data? And if we start doing that, the hope and idea is we'll get more people in the public's attention. They'll understand that they have a personal responsibility before downloading that app or providing their information onto the internet. They should have an expectation of privacy with what that person who has that information is going to do. But when we say cybersecurity, it's talking over people's heads. It's making it not understandable, and it's really not making it personal. So this data care idea, there's so many things from the healthcare we can leverage. You mentioned Dr. Fauci. We don't have a cyber hospital. If something happens to your computer or some cyber incident, there's no place to go, no centralized. There's no state cyber departments. But if we figure out how the healthcare has actually structured their ability to deliver their service to the population, there's a lot of structure in there. Meaning pediatrics, how we treat young children. Well, we can figure out how we can talk to young children. Same thing as, geriatrics and specialty. If we start talking in a way that the public actually is able to understand, when we have them listening, we can actually then provide them tools with what to do. So data care helps answer the why cybersecurity is important. And once the why is answered, we should be able to attract a lot of people from a much more diverse background.
And in many ways, with the healthcare analogy, it's almost like we're recruiting people into the cybersecurity industry to be brain surgeons in the healthcare industry. The cybersecurity industry, we've really said we need to share everything and put information out there. But it really creates this barrier to entry, because if you want to go into cybersecurity, maybe you've got to get a ISC squared, a CISPA certification. Maybe you've got to, you want to go to school and get a degree or certification in cybersecurity. It really, really creates a large body of knowledge that you have to learn and master before you're kind of considered an expert. And, we need to be a little bit more open to the vast majority of jobs that need to be done out there. And when I was in the Air Force, we had this problem of, where's the real Air Force, right? Is it the Minuteman, missile operator in a silo? Is it a B-2 pilot? Is it somebody who's a general at the Pentagon? It's the same thing in cybersecurity. What does it really mean to be in our industry? And in many ways, we haven't done a good job of these entry-level positions. We almost kind of look down on them when, in fact, we should be encouraging more people to join. This is part of a problem with being from diversity as well. If a typical woman, a typical, maybe Black African American, I say typical, I'm being stereotypical, but the idea is that it's not very inviting, because not only do you have to sort of overcome this body of knowledge to be considered an expert, you're also kind of approaching potential racial, whether they're imagined or real, discriminations, and it's just not exactly a comfortable situation. So one of the things we have to do is be purposeful. That's very important for recruiting this. When we were at Tenable Network Security, we would go out and try to recruit women, minorities, and you can't just say we want minorities. You have to either target women, target African American schools, target schools that can and sources of employment that kind of bring these different types of diverse folks to even let them know that they're wanted.
And one of the big reasons, and looking back in time, when young girls are growing up, we basically one of their first toys is a doll, and we teach nurture, nurture, nurture. And the boys we teach go out there and play and learn and use your hands and that type of stuff. So as a society, we also need to shift that. Yes, we need nurture, we need compassion, we need all of those things. However, we also need to challenge to work with your hands, to think differently, because if we want people as adults to act differently, we need to have them as children to be exposed to do things differently. And historically, if you don't have a good experience in your school, your high school, your elementary school with technology, and you're fighting it and it doesn't seem very inviting, that's not going to be a very big attractor to people wanting to come into that industry. So we need to expose more people to more technologies, to more capabilities. The internet's doing it itself, but with respect to teaching the civics or the ethics of online activity, I really think that we're falling down. And again, if we start putting it more on the data and saying, helping young people understand your data is going to be online forever, what do you want people to be able to do with it? And when you ask that question, they start paying attention. And that's being more inviting and more purposeful of getting people into this industry.
And the concept of data care also allows schools, imagine a school guidance counselor who's trying to encourage a young woman to go into the cybersecurity industry. That guidance counselor probably doesn't know the difference between a red team operator or even a SOC operator, what the difference between a chief information security officer and a chief information officer really are. So having the term data care really makes it a lot more friendly, really makes it a lot more open to positions like IT administrators, patch managers, people who do authentication and provisioning for like human resources. So it really expands that tent. And you have to remember that the general public, they have been mostly educated by our politicians and Hollywood, who have not done a great job of characterizing our industry. So talking about this really, really makes it easier for folks to understand. And you can try this yourself. If you're dealing with a priest, with a barber, a car dealer, I mean, somebody who's not in the cybersecurity industry, but a professional, you can ask them, do you have cybersecurity? And I guarantee you, they're going to say they have a product, they have an antivirus, or maybe they have an IT person. But if you ask them, like Cindy said, how do you care for your data? You're going to completely change that conversation. And that's going to empower them to encourage other people to join our industry, but it's also going to empower them to take care of the data that they have.
And another point that the intent or hope is that we call it data care, that umbrella is very large. It brings in Facebook, it brings in big tech, it brings in Amazon. One of my favorite questions to ask people is, Amazon a cyber company? And people, depending on what your background is, you get different answers to that. However, the general public knows Cyber Monday, you go to Amazon to buy. So of course they're a cyber company. So again, allowing Hollywood and marketing to define the industry has not been able to help attract and really make it purposeful with why people should be paying attention, why they have some personal responsibility, but then also why they should demand their data be utilized in a way that they get to govern.
Back to the personal responsibility and bringing it back to modern events, we had Solarwinds occur, where apparently the Russians were able to hack into a couple companies, including Solarwinds, and use that to potentially break into a variety of government agencies, but potentially the entire SolarWinds customer base. Now that's sensationalized because apparently that didn't happen. But I had the chance to speak with a number of defense industrial based companies, supply chain companies, and I said to their executives, do you even know if you have SolarWinds? Do you even know if there was an anomaly that came out of that product? And I didn't really get a lot of good responses, because that usually folks who are one or two steps away from enterprise organizations, IT is not the number one thing that they're worried about. And by bringing out data care and really making this a lot more broader concept for the market that's out there, we can really increase that personal responsibility. And I believe all the technology, all the training that we can do is good, but it's not going to be enough unless people really approach cybersecurity like they approach healthcare, where they have a personal responsibility, and this is a career field that people want to go join.
And it's not going to slow down. There's not going to be less technology. There's not going to be any stoppage of and holding in time that we're going to be where we are today. And when we try to chase regulation around technology, firewall or IDS or who knows, it makes it very difficult for regulators, for the conversation, for anybody to really talk about that technology because it's moving so fast. By the time they know they need to talk about it, it's already established or there's other parameters that they're not willing to move on. But if we centralize the regulation and the ideas around data and personal access and personal responsibility and commercial and company responsibility and being stewards of data, the conversation does not necessarily matter with respect to what technology it is, but it's the central idea of that data. And we can keep people engaged in having the conversation and allow them to understand what is going on in this new world, which is just moving so fast.
So, Cindy, this is Predict 2021.
Yes.
Do you want to make any predictions about the cybersecurity industry or where we're going as with policy or anything like that?
Well, unfortunately, taking advantage of something that was a bad thing, the pandemic, really did impact the world so incredibly hurtfully. However, for cybersecurity, people are paying attention. I do believe that this is the time, and I see cybersecurity moving forward. I see more demand from people to make secure products as compared to having an afterthought. I think security is going to be coming to the forefront, that it's not going to be patch on security later. It's going to be build secure from the beginning. At least I'm hoping.
So I'm concerned as an industry that we just kind of told everybody that we can't secure an election and that the best way to do it is with paper ballots, that the machines themselves are not there. And I think when you look at Solarwinds and you look at the lack of response that's out there, I'm really concerned that one of the things we're going to start recommending is back to air-gapped networks. You look at the DoD, you look at the intelligence community, and you look at how they do things, and they do background checks, they do air-gapped networks, they do separate networks for separate levels there. I think you're going to see that. This might also impact people's use of the cloud. I'm already starting to see companies who are afraid of vendor lock-in, whether it's Amazon or Google
or lockout
or lockout after Parler, of course. But the reality is that a lot of people can go to a data center, do VMware, put Kubernetes on top of that, and really get the benefits of the cloud, the elasticity, the reliability, and a lot of those APIs. We're starting to see people come back and doing that. So I'm not going to say that the great cloud migration is going to stop and come back, because there's a lot of advantages to running public applications, on those cloud. But for organizations that need to control their own data from the ground up, I think you're going to see a lot less adoption of the cloud. What do you think we're going to see from an employment point of view? Are we going to have more folks?
Yes. So again, I think education is going to be driving a lot of it in school. Just the need. Again, I think it's really interesting to see that the school systems were so caught off guard to go electronic, yet business and enterprise has been training electronically for 20, 25 years. So again, I think there needs to be a dynamic shift with respect to convenience. And again, I'm so hopeful that the unfortunately negative impacts of the Zoom bombing and the reality that things can happen, they might be convenient, but you need to have control, will really, again, help people push forward to that security. I need a password. I understand a password. Oh, my password manager. Oh, okay. The stickies and the passwords from today are gone. I'm really hoping passwords go away. But again, there's a lot of training, a lot of education. And I do think that because of Zoom, we will actually get more people involved in doing that better and more secure. So unfortunately, it did expose a lot of kids who didn't have access to technology to a lot of technology now, and it's hopefully going to create that curiosity that we can fill and help grow.
So I think the last part we'd like to talk about today is how we approach investing in cyber companies and cyber nonprofits. And we have a very simple set of questions that we ask all organizations. And they're basically, what problem do you solve? How do you solve it? Do you have any proof of success or some sort of accomplishments to date? If you're asking for money, what are you going to do with the money? And then finally, do you have any vision of success? Like, what does success look like for you? And a lot of times when we speak with both nonprofits and cybersecurity startups, the founders can answer part of that question. They might want to tell you that they've been on CNN or that they have a PBS special on their nonprofit, and that's all great, but that's kind of details. It doesn't go to the substance of what you're doing. And we've often been pitched companies, and we actually have to play the game every now and then. Was that a nonprofit or was that a startup? There's some nonprofits that actually make some good money and have technology, and there's some startups that might be more effective as a nonprofit. But I'm hoping that anybody who's listening, whether you're trying to pitch a project inside your organization, whether you're trying to evaluate a solution from a vendor, you can kind of think about those things. Like, so what problem are you solving? How do you solve it? Those first two questions right there, if you talk about an elevator pitch, that's the answer. And if you're reading a deck from a sales pitch or a potential company you're trying to partner with, you can't answer those two basic questions, or somehow they flip those answers. That's a big problem with our industry. This has got loads of acronyms and different ways to do the same thing.
And funding for a nonprofit. An investor wants to make their money back or beyond. And so I don't think cybersecurity is necessarily attuned to the idea of investing for the good of the industry. And again, one of the things that Ron and I are doing, hopeful to do with the Gula Tech Foundation, is to amplify those messages of the mission of the nonprofits, but also amplify the capability and the funding to those nonprofits so that we can get everybody on board and the public engaged and really deliver a hopefully more secure future, if we're predicting here. And
just to kind of conclude on some of the nonprofits and for-profit stuff. I mean, there's an amazing number of nonprofits out there. I mean, MITRE, for example, we all quote the MITRE ATT&CK framework. They're a large nonprofit. You have an organization like the Center for Internet Security that is also a nonprofit. Definitely can walk across, both vendor and government and academia and commercial type of roles. All the ISACs, like have you ever been to those different ISACs, FS ISAC, HS ISAC, all the different ISACs that are out there, they're all nonprofits. But then you start getting into these other types of training organizations, professional mentorships. There's definitely a lot of work to be done to kind of increase that. And when we talk about taking them to a next level and getting a level of success, it's for a commercial company, you could go from seed to Series A or go from $1 million in revenue to $10 million in revenue. But for a nonprofit, it might be, hey, if they can demonstrate some value, they might be able to get a grant from your county, from your state. They might a lot of cybersecurity places get grants from Department of Homeland Security. So there's a lot of opportunity to make a big impact, both in policy and with the nonprofits that are out there. So having said that, Cindy, where do people go to learn more about you and me and what we're doing and everybody we're helping? Well,
our website is gula.tech. We named our company Gula Tech Adventures because we certainly think we're on an adventure. We're on an adventure together, but we're also on an adventure with the rest of the world, trying to make sure that we can move forward the mission and the availability. But Gula .tech is the best place to go. You can find our Gula Tech Foundation, and we're actually coming out with a new podcast, Gula Tech Cyber Fiction, as well.
Awesome. Well, I hope everybody enjoys the Predict 2021 conference, and I hope everybody enjoys being in the data care industry and can not only inspire personal responsibility in the general public, but can inspire everybody to want to join this amazing career field. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here with the Monday headlines for you. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at how microservices are changing the application landscape for organizations with monolithic applications. One of the core tenets of DevOps is speed, yet trying to do DevOps with monolithic applications often is like trying to run a 50-yard dash while carrying a 20-pound pack of potatoes. It's really not easy. Transforming monolithic applications into something that is more cloud-friendly can stymie the best of organizations, even those who are doing DevOps already. The answer, however, can be found in microservices. According to research from IDC, the primary benefits of microservices are the improvements to developers' ability to design, debug, update, and leverage third-party code in making applications work for the cloud. The problem with microservices, however, is that depending on the path an organization is taking and where they begin, moving to a microservices architecture can be straightforward or it can be complex. Transforming legacy applications often means manually disassembling legacy code and breaking it up into standalone code elements that will run as microservices. And that's no simple process. There are companies out there that are ready and able to help organizations tackle the monolith to microservices beast, as well as those looking to help organizations looking to build microservices-based applications from scratch. This article takes a look at the microservices landscape and offers some suggestions for organizations looking to leap into microservices or those simply just considering the idea. Also, we have an article about how decision-making has undergone a digital transformation in and of itself, kind of sorts. The ability to make effective business decisions has historically relied on factors such as experience, qualifications, talent, and, in many cases, luck. Strategic and tactical choices are also informed by borrowing the insight and knowledge of others. But that was then, and this is now. Today, organizations have many more options at their disposal to inform decision-making than previous generations. And thanks to advances in technology, many businesses are now sitting on enough data for advanced analytics to inform smarter, more efficient decisions. Advanced analytics is a rapidly growing niche in technology, noted as one of the most important transformational IT trends. This article discusses some of the ways advanced analytics can help organizations move past basic decision-making in all areas of their business, but especially in IT, to increase the value of all they do. In news, Circle CI is now enabling IT teams to configure their own private integrations around its namesake CI/CD platform. Internal IT teams can now create private orbs that they can securely reuse to perform any number of tasks, such as implementing a frequently accessed microservice via the command line interface and invoked via the Circle CI platform. The goal, according to the company, is to make DevOps teams more efficient at a time when the number of microservices organizations are reusing is increasing steadily. Rather than having to manually integrate each of these services every time they are needed, a private orb will consistently automate the process using the same template. That approach over time will enable DevOps teams to more easily build and maintain an ecosystem of microservices, the company said. All right, over on Container Journal, we have news of JetStack, which is a unit of Venafi, and it just recently launched a platform dubbed JetStack Secure, through which IT teams can automate the management of certificates in Kubernetes environments. As more microservices-based applications are deployed across a distributed computing environment, a more automated approach is needed for managing both public trusted certificates for ingress based on the transport layer security protocol and private certificates for intra-service MTLS using a service mesh. JetStack Secure is accessed via a web interface through which IT teams can track certificates, including any that have been manually created by developers. It also identifies operational issues based on cert manager status and health, as well as X.509 certificate misconfigurations. It also enables organizations to automatically request certificates, which ultimately reduces friction across a DevOps workflow. Also on Container Journal is news from Solo.io, which announced general availability of a framework for managing the open source Istio service mesh deployed on top of Kubernetes clusters. Glue Mesh Enterprise includes a set of tools for deploying, observing, and securing Istio and the open source Envoy proxy software it's based on. In addition, Solo.io will make available tools based on WebAssembly to make it possible to customize an Istio environment by adding additional functionality. Solo.io also said it will make available its own internal Istio experts to help internal IT teams maximize their investment in the service mesh, which was created by Google, IBM, and Lyft. These moves are the latest volley in a simmering battle for service mesh supremacy. Istio is the most complex of the available service mesh options IT organizations can employ to manage application programming interfaces and abstract the underlying network infrastructure. The trade-off, of course, is that it provides the most functionality. I don't expect we'll have to wait too long before there's more news about service mesh technology from other players in the space. It's a relatively nascent technology, but it's growing quickly. All right, over on Security Boulevard, Christopher Burgess dissects the popular HBO series The Flight Attendant, which on the surface is a quirky murder mystery featuring, you guessed it, a flight attendant. But he shows the series is much more than that. Hidden within the murder mystery is a subplot of espionage and intrigue reminiscent of any number of today's real-life espionage cases involving corporations and nation-states. Teaching moments abound, and it's worthy of approbation. The series has something for every corporate insider threat team to use in their awareness training. If you like the show currently, or perhaps are interested in checking it out, be warned that this article has a few possible spoilers. But if you're willing to take the chance, this article does a great job comparing theater to real life. So much so that you may have a difficult time discerning where fantasy ends and reality picks up. Or vice versa, depending on what you consider to be reality, I guess. And finally, we have an article that looks at how to fight back against COVID-19 cyber fraud. Since the start of the pandemic, we've been warned about the ways that criminals are using online as a green field for criminal activity. And as proof, it's been reported that voice phishing, or vishing, attacks have skyrocketed during the pandemic. That's according to a joint report from the FBI and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So what are we to do? This article takes a look at what's been going on with cyber fraud as a result of the pandemic and offers ways organizations can defend themselves against COVID-related cyber fraud. Multiple security approaches are a good idea, and with all of them working in tandem, organizations will be better protected from the surge in COVID-19 related cybercrime. That's the hope, anyway. All right, that's it for today's headlines. Please check back with me tomorrow when I'll have a fresh batch for you. Until then, stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Nir Valtman, who is the VP and Head of Product and Data Security at Finastra, and Matt Maddox, who is the Managing Principal at Synopsys Software Integrity Group. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for being with us.
Okay. So, one of the things that I really kind of fascinated me when I got your information about a collaboration that you guys recently did was just the level of security intelligence that's being included in a kind of you guys are kind of bringing financial services apps to the next level from a security standpoint. But I do want to talk a little bit about this case study that you guys sent over to me, how you guys work together to create an app for Finastra, or increase the security of the Finastra Financial Services app. So and just kind of look at the space in general. So maybe Nir, maybe you can kind of talk to bolster the security of your apps?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off with with what we're trying to solve,
Sure.
and wrap that around with some security aspects. So Finastra has a platform that connects between banks and fintechs. So the platform opens access through APIs into the core banking systems in the banks, which means that I think it quite explains the challenge that we have here, that we're opening up systems that the assumption around them was that they're open only internally through multiple firewalls. And now we just open it up through the internet to actually provide value to the banks, right? Some of them actually developed functionality around our APIs internally, like as an innovation platform. And in some cases, we have fintechs who connect to those APIs to provide more value. Can be a bill pay functionality, micro savings, churn prediction for bank customers and such. Okay, so when this platform was established, it's called FusionFabric.cloud. We started to think, what do we really need to do to provide more confidence to the banks that we are protecting the access into their core banking systems? And this is where we started to have this conversation with Synopsys, and we really thought about, what do we really need to know to provide that more confidence, right? So it starts with a very basic exercise that focuses on some sort of like a third-party risk management that asks questions around the product itself. It can be secure development lifecycle, prior penetration testing, software composition analysis, and such. But then if a company decides to take that to the next step and get a higher certification, we have that offering as well as part of that partnership. And essentially, some banks may want to get a basic type of application in terms of security certification. Sometimes it can be a production-ready product for them, and sometimes it can be just to play with that. So we ended up with baking in a few models of security validations for every application that we onboard into the platform. And technically today, there is no application that can be connected to any tenant, which is not even production, even UAT, which is a testing tenant,
right?
Without passing through that validation that we have.
Okay. All right, great. So Matt, then, speaking from the security side, Synopsys, how did you guys go about kind of creating what I don't know if you guys actually created a turnkey solution for them, or if you actually created kind of a custom program for Finastra to incorporate into its offering. But how did you guys go about kind of creating this solution for Finastra, which obviously, being in the fintech space, had some certain unique needs regarding the security and meeting compliance and regulations and a whole host of other issues, and not the least of which is providing that user experience.
This is the core of what the Synopsys Software Integrity Group does. We help our clients, manage security and quality risks comprehensively throughout the whole application lifecycle. And we're a recognized leader in this space. We work with most of the world's biggest banks and other entities that really take security very seriously. We believe at Synopsys that software security is most successful when it's baked in, when it's committed to as a non-negotiable part of the development and delivery of secure products and applications and platforms. And with Synopsys and Finastra, we share that vision. So under Nir's leadership, he's made security part of the FusionFabric.cloud process, but also culture and governance. Finastra recognizes that financial service clients demand secure solutions. It's table stakes. And so he's made it a requirement that any fintech that's coming onto his platform passes a very rigorous third party, by us, unbiased assessment of their capabilities. And we're going to give them that hard-nosed assessment and clear, unbiased feedback. But what Nir's done, and we collaborated on this, was he built tiers of service available to these fintech partners because they're at varying levels of maturity. Some of these are very, very large, experienced organizations, and some are startups. And so he's built these tiers of service. So if he finds a fintech that's got an interesting technology that he wants to bring to market, but they have security gaps, we can step in and help them mature. So Finastra didn't build a one-size-fits-all solution. We have multiple tiers aimed at fitting the needs of the fintechs that he wants to bring to market. So this was a collaborative partnership from start to finish under Nir and his team's leadership.
So how much does DevOps or DevSecOps play a role in this this undertaking, Nir? Are you guys taking kind of the core of an application and kind of finessing it and kind of making it your own and making sure that the security is included or wrapped around it or actually as part of the the application developer software the application development process, or is it is it pretty much a fully baked application when it comes into your cloud and you're offering it to banks and other customers?
So it's a good question because there are two ways to look at that, right? What the banks receives as a system and how fintechs access those systems. So any software that we deliver to banks, either on-premise or we host it for them or provide them a SaaS solution, all of that goes through our internal security gates and our internal security development lifecycle. Of course, we have security architects that review all of the requirements and need to approve that prior release. We have static analysis, dynamic, software composition analysis. All of that is already baked into the build or CI/CD pipelines. It really depends on the type of the product, and all of that has security gates prior release, whether it's manual or automatic. It really depends again on the type of the product because some of them are quite big products, and everyone talk about microservices and cloud, but some solutions, mainly core banking systems, have a lot of baked functionality that is, heavy. I'll put it this way.
Right. Yeah.
So all of that internally, we definitely have those gates, and this process is quite mature, and in fact is being audited by regulators on a regular basis. On the flip side, the thing that we could not control much is what fintechs actually do to get access into those systems, and this is why we implemented both process and technology. On the technology side, we implemented API threat protection to identify abnormal behavior against our APIs. So this is one thing. But on the other side, I mean, how do we know that a fintech wasn't compromised? How do we know that they don't access from an abnormal IP address into our systems? How do we know that they actually have security-aware developers? Do they have the security tools on their side to prevent attack against them? And this realm of the third-party assessment to follow similar practices as we do, this is the part that Synopsys takes in the ecosystem.
All right, great. Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about some of the systems that they're being connected to, especially in financial services. In the more staid traditional banking environments, for one, they still, so many of them still run on mainframes, and those systems of record that traditionally have not really been kind of thought of in the DevOps realm, if you will, but they are definitely coming into their own, and kind of they're certainly not dead by any stretch of the imagination. So, did you guys have any issues from either the Finastra or the Synopsys side in considering those types of systems that you guys had to connect to? Were there any particular considerations that you had to keep in mind with regards to either security or just the connection themselves?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the considerations we have, if software supply chain issues are obviously top of mind for a lot of people today because of recent incidents.
Mm-hmm.
Near and Finastra were way ahead of this, but what we were looking at was all elements of that supply chain and trying to identify most likely areas of risk that we could go assess against it. So should we be looking at malicious code detection? Do we need to be really doing code reviews? Or is it, pen testing? What kinds of tools or techniques can we use to find the most likely risk? And it wasn't really specifically that these are ultimately going to be tied to a mainframe-based system, because you're right, a lot of those core banking systems still are and performing fairly well. We are seeing a transition. They're starting to move some of those things to the cloud. But it was less of that concern and more of the concern that we would have to be bespoke, that you'd have very, very different kinds of fintechs, and we'd have to customize the model. Where Near did not want us to be very, very bespoke and very, very slow. We still needed to have automation, and we needed to be able to accelerate this to operate with a DevSecOps mindset. So we married the two and built a model that is sort of customizable to the state of the fintech that's being brought in. But the output is similar in the reporting we're providing, et cetera, back to Finastra, so that they can make an informed business decision about whether to include that fintech in the platform.
I'll just add one thing about that, because at the end of the day, we need to start from somewhere, right? We can develop something very rigorous and end up with a slow process. And the first thing that Matt and I agreed on is that we will make mistakes. And once we agreed upon that, we kicked off the process, because we said, we can have multiple iterations on the things that we want to check, but first, let's check. And that's how it works.
That's a great way to approach things, because that's kind of what DevOps is all about, right? You fail fast and you move on. So that's awesome. So obviously financial services or fintech has been a huge area of focus in the DevSec or DevOps and DevSecOps realm for, it's gaining. It's been about 6 or 9 months or so since we really started hearing a lot about stuff happening in the fintech space with regard to DevOps. And so obviously this is an area that is growing. Where do you guys see this going from here for you guys, and maybe for the market in general?
I definitely see an area where things that are today, let's call it within the pipeline, that are controlled, with the integration of security into DevOps. I definitely see a way to see things outside of the pipeline. And you can see a lot of startups coming up just with that concept, in which, they start looking at things outside of the pipeline and make decisions based on that. It can be AI ops, which is something that essentially tells you if something behaves inappropriately or abnormally, and it can end up with other quality or security tools that can observe everything throughout the pipeline, from the left side up to the monitoring of a system. So I'd say that it's like you have just the chassis of the car. Everything was already built, and now people start putting doors and wheels on that solution. But the car, if it has only chassis and wheels, it will, and an engine, of course, it will drive, right? But people understand that sometimes it's too cold outside and they need doors and windows.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Great. Well, I wish you guys the best of luck. Go ahead.
We're seeing an interest in taking the automation we've built into DevOps pipelines and adding out-of-bound activities to it. So can I see threat models or pen testing results within the pipeline to accelerate? And so we're seeing a maturation process. Big banks aren't as far behind as people think. They are very, very process-driven by design, and their business and their culture requires it. And so these things have to be mature and relatively bulletproof. To Near's point, car has to drive.
Right.
But we're seeing an awful lot of emphasis on how do we make DevOps, faster, more efficient, with a business result in mind, the end goal in mind. It's not there's not much security theater left in this. It's really now actionable results where I can identify deficiencies and fix them as quickly as possible. And then testing and those sorts of things are really validation. You're not finding fault there. It's validation that the process is working.
Awesome. All right. Well, Nir and Matt, thank you so much for walking me through this. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about security in the fintech space moving forward, and hopefully you guys will be an important part of that conversation. So thank you so much for having the conversation with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Rob Chang, who is the CEO of PCmatic. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about PCmatic.
Wow. We're going to talk about cybersecurity insurance.
Well, we are, but let's start with PCmatic.
Well, PCmatic, actually, I was just putting together a deck. I found this company 21 years ago at this point in 1999. I started out, it used to be called PC Pit Stop, for those who remember that. And it was a free website to go and make computers run faster. Back then, Windows 98 was the operating system, and it had a lot of problems. And so the website found it became very successful. And then we started writing software to make computers run faster. And then we, at some point, we created a product called PCmatic, and that was about 10 years later. And so that's what it is today. PCmatic at the time was to do everything that you needed for the home market to make your computer run faster and keep it secure. And then my mom and my wife both got infected with an early version of ransomware, so we really got into security. And so in 2011, we created our own antivirus. And then it was very unique at the time. For one, it was based on the cloud. And the other thing, it was based on a blacklist rather than a whitelist, which is a proactive way rather than a reactive way of dealing with viruses. And now here we are. So after that, the company just exploded. We're on television quite a bit. And so here we are now. I mean, we're still the only whitelist antivirus on the market that proactively blocks the viruses that no one else can.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, sounds like you guys have a pretty extensive knowledge base when it comes to ransomware, which is great, because that's what I want to talk to you about today. We've been hearing so much about the increase in ransomware, especially since the onset of COVID-19, the pandemic, and folks working from home, and attackers have really taken advantage of the fact that security defenses are not as strong as they were when everybody was working in the office. And so, ransomware incidents have just risen dramatically. And we've been hearing a lot about the idea of cyber insurance. And it's something that I know a lot of companies kind of bank on, if you'll pardon the pun, but they really depend on cyber insurance to keep them secure. And if not really keep them secure, but basically keep them in business if they do get hit with ransomware or something like that. But like everything else, insurance is only as good as you really kind of need it to be. So if it almost seems like it's a necessity. That's everybody complains about it until they need it. But what are your thoughts on cyber insurance as it relates to ransomware? And because of I know there are so many different regulations around it. I'm just wondering of the efficacy of it, if it's really worth it.
Yeah. Okay. So the FBI says, so let's start here. The FBI says that you should not, at all possible, pay the ransom.
Right.
And they've been saying this since the very beginning, 7, 8 years ago, that people should try to avoid at all costs paying the ransom. Mm-hmm. And the rationale is quite simple. The more that we pay it, the more they're going to do it.
Right.
Really, because and that's actually the spiral that we're in right now, because the more that they pay or people pay, then they have more money to invest in making the ransomware more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that, and I won't get into how sophisticated the ransomware is getting, but it's from 7 years ago till now, it is like night and day what it can do and how fast it can traverse the network and propagate. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other side, though, you have cybersecurity insurance, and they actually do exactly the opposite. If you are, small city, let's say Lake City, Florida, they were hit, I think 3 years ago, and they paid a ransom of $400,000. And I was thinking, how can a little city like that pay $400,000? And the reason was cybersecurity insurance. And if you're a little city and you got hit with it and you're paying your premiums every single month, what are you going to ask them to do? You're going to ask them to pay the ransom. So rather than being the last thing to do, it now becomes the first thing that they do, is pay the ransom and pay it as fast as possible, because obviously the faster you pay the ransom, the faster you're back up and running again.
Right.
And so, what we're seeing is that, and I think the cybersecurity insurance industry is in a spiral also, because, ransomware, as you're just indicating, it's happening more and more and more. And I don't think that is actually comprehended in their actuarial models. Is that, if they're paying, the probability that they get hit is going up over time. I think they're doing more like a car accident, where the probability that I get the car accident today is the same as next year, and it's not. Right. The problem is getting worse and worse, and so therefore, at some point in time, they're not going to make money. The other thing that we're seeing, and it's the scary part, is two things. I think number one is that the ransom, the value of the ransoms have gone up, probably by a factor of 5. Just because of that. I mean, 400,000, that was a really big number. Think about it, 400,000 2 years ago was a really big number. 400,000 right now isn't a big number even now.
Right.
And now it's in the million. And that is because of cybersecurity insurance. And so we're caught in this spiral, and then as soon as they pay it, then we're just going to have more of it. And so that's what's happening. I think there's a way to do cybersecurity insurance well, but we're not doing that right now.
Yeah, it seems to be following that traditional insurance model that, to your point, doesn't take into a lot of factors, such as the fact that, ransomware has actually become a business model for some organizations. You can go on the dark web and there are ransomware as a service companies now, and they can, they'll hit anybody you want for the right amount, or you can, you can buy a ransomware program or, whatever. But to your point, insurance companies are, I don't want to say that they're culpable, but they're certainly kind of adding to the problem sometimes when they are so I don't want to say eager, but they're willing to pay when ransomware hits. But at the same time, again, to your point, the Treasury Department has said if you do pay a ransomware or ransom because your systems are locked, you are effectively funding a criminal activity. So, you could actually be arrested. So, I mean, businesses are right now between a rock and a hard place, and it's difficult to understand. Really, at the end of the day, when your systems are hit, it's difficult to kind of figure out whether you should pay. And I can understand why organizations are just like, if they get hit, they're just like calling their insurance companies and say, pay it. And, so, but I wonder if there's a better way that organizations can protect themselves, obviously, doing the right backup and taking all the precautionary measures. But when we're talking about actually, if they have been hit with ransomware, is there a better way to approach paying the ransom or not paying the ransom than just cyber insurance.
Okay, so why don't you made a comment, and I want to say, so backup. So starting at the end of 2019, backup has always been one of the things, backup. Well, that is no longer a good recipe against ransomware. And the reason why is because they, in addition to encrypting the files, they're also stealing them. And now they will go and publish those files on the dark web. So if you're a K through 12, my kids are in K through 12, then that your kids' information could be on the dark web. And actually that frankly scares me. I mean, so even if you backed up, actually this just happened, in Las Vegas, but Clark County, they decided not to pay the ransom and they didn't have insurance. And then the kids' information ended up on the web. So I mean, so backup is because they had the backup. So I don't want people to think that backup is it used to be the right solution.
Yeah.
But like I say, they keep on getting more sophisticated, and now backup is no longer adequate. And now I'm going to say that this started at the end of 2019, and I'm going to say that 1 out of 4 ransomware attacks now are stealing this information and encrypting at the same time. So I just wanted to make a comment about that. As far as, if you're infected, whether pay the ransom or not, whether it's that simple, it really does get down to that at this point in time. My view has always been, this is something we have to prevent. You have to stop it before it happens. So prevention is everything. I mean, is to go and do what you can to prevent it from happening in the first place. Our product is based on a whitelist rather than blacklist. I don't know whether you've covered those differences between protection but a whitelist is a proactive. The idea behind a whitelist is there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off because a whitelist will go sometimes and call a good file bad, which is an inconvenience. That's for sure. But it also catches off ransomware. And so that's the trade-off. And as the ransomware gets worse and worse, I think more people are going to shift to a whitelist type of solution in order to be proactive. Other things to be proactive, and the other things that they do now is that they're entering through RDP ports. And so, I mean, the multi-factor authentication is good. I would say change your passwords. Actually, my big one that I've been trying to tell everybody, the security hole is actually that employees are really bad at choosing their own passwords. And so for your Netflix and all that, we all have to choose our own passwords because but you don't, as a business, you don't have to. My company, we issue passwords, and that closes the security hole significantly. And I really encourage any business to issue passwords rather than allow employees to change them. I mean, we have studies that show this, is that, people never change their passwords. I mean, 1 out of 2 people never change their passwords in 20 years. And then the other big one, the other really, really big one is that 1 out of 4 people use the same passwords for home and business. So there's your security hole right there. That's how they're getting in right now, because let's just assume that, they have all our existing passwords. And so if you're issuing a password, then you close that security hole, and then they can get in through RDP. But prevention, I think, is the recipe for this, and I hope we get there soon.
Yeah, me too. Do you think that you mentioned two-factor authentication? Do you think that 2FA and biometrics or other means of alternative authentication in addition to passwords? Do you think that that's going to become even more prevalent now that we've seen such an increase in ransomware and just cyber threats in general? Do you think that more organizations are going to say this is a necessity now, we've got to do this?
I think that everybody thinks that now. I mean, so I think that the thinking is there. I mean, the problem with multi-factor authentication is, one, it's expensive and it's difficult to do. And so therefore, not all organizations, certainly not a small business, certainly not a K through 12, can do these things. I mean, they just don't have, I mean, if you think about a K through 12, the science teacher frequently is the person running IT for that organization. So it's hard to imagine, them getting to multi-factor authentication. And that's why you see cities and K through 12s getting hit, because they don't have the ability to do it. I think they know what it is, but then, and actually I have friends here at a fairly well Finance Hospital, and they have multi-factor authentication, but not for their email. Actually, that's another really big one is email. I mean, they come in two ways. One is through email. The other way is through RDP. And actually, and the really, really big one is email, because email, if you think about it, is really at the source of a lot of the ransomware. Here, our hospital got hit here, and so they're redoing it all, but they got in through email, and they read all the emails and from the CFO, and then from there, they were able to get enough in so they could penetrate the whole network. And so email is another one. You got to go and secure your email if you're a business. And what I've done in my company, and I suggest everybody else, if you're a small company or even if you're a big one, issue the passwords rather than have people choose them.
All right. Well, definitely good advice, Rob. Thank you so much for chatting with me a little bit about ransomware today and ways organizations can help protect their precious data. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. Thanks so much for joining me.
Okay, it's my pleasure.
Great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Monday edition of the Webinars Preview. As always, we have so many great webinars coming up on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Wanted to let you know about 3 that are happening very, very soon in the hopes that you can mark your calendar and join us. The first one is happening tomorrow, Tuesday, February 23rd at 11 a.m. on DevOps.com. It's the Zoe Roundtable Discussion. It's actually part of the Enterprise DevOps series, and it's sponsored by Broadcom. This webinar features a panel of experts who are all very well versed in the ZOS mainframe environment, and they'll be discussing how DevOps practices can be implemented successfully in mainframes using the Zoe open source framework. The session will provide a quick overview of Zoe and then dive into some real world use cases. And during the webinar, the panel will illustrate how it is possible to onboard mainframe applications while preserving the platform's core attributes of reliability, scalability, and security. The panelists for this session include Rose Sakic of Broadcom, Gustavo de Palma Almeida of IBM Global Technology Services, Tim McCown of Auto Owners Insurance, and Rafi Khan of Wipro. This has a great mix of end users and practitioners, so it's definitely going to be a fascinating conversation around Zoe and mainframes and DevOps, and certainly not one to be missed if your organization is still using mainframes in your environment. The next webinar I want to let you know about is also happening Tuesday, the 23rd. This one is at 1 p.m. Eastern, and it's called How to Reduce Enterprise Application Security Risks. This one is on Security Boulevard, and it is sponsored by WhiteSource. Now, WhiteSource, in conjunction with Ponemon Institute, recently surveyed more than 600 IT and IT security practitioners and found that the highest level of security risk is considered by many organizations to be in the application layer. Certainly not surprising, but definitely an issue that organizations need to address, especially if they are in the business of developing applications, and really who isn't these days. So this webinar takes a look at ways organizations can reduce their application security risks and look at things such as why applications are more vulnerable to attack than other areas of vulnerabilities, and then addressing vulnerabilities in enterprise applications and some of the best practices for high-performing organizations in reducing their application security risk. Definitely a great webinar to check out. Finally, we have for you Take the Pain Out of Multi-Cluster Kubernetes. This one is happening Tuesday, also February 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com, and it is sponsored by Mirantis. And this webinar focuses on how organizations can more easily manage Kubernetes clusters using Lens, which is a Kubernetes IDE, and it is billed as the world's most popular. So there you go. Lens is an open source free technology. It enables developers and operators to monitor real-time events, debug and deploy applications within their Kubernetes clusters effortlessly, and so much more. So Lens works with any CNCF conformant Kubernetes distribution. So this webinar will be geared toward managing Kubernetes complexity to ensure faster go-to-market within container orchestration initiatives. Great stuff, especially if you're working in the Kubernetes space and you need a little help there. So definitely a webinar worth checking out for you. All right, that's all I have for today's edition of the Webinars Preview. Please check back with me tomorrow when I will have a whole new batch for you. Until then, have a great day, everybody, and please, whatever you do, stay safe. All right, next up, we've got Analyst Corner with Mitch Ashley. He talks about his upcoming panel at Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit happening March 4th and 5th. He's going to explore new security trends for the year in ransomware, financial payments, collaboration software, and more. So let's give it a listen.
Hi, and welcome to Analyst Corner. It's Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. I'd like to highlight an upcoming event that Accelerated Strategies Group is sponsoring, and that's the Cybersecurity 2021 event. It's coming up on, March 4th, March 5th. It's a virtual event, of course. There are a couple of things that our folks are doing there. First, Charles Kalaji is going to be on Friday the 5th, talking about the natural law of digital data. Now, if you know Charles, he's been one of the most senior security analysts in the industry. I used to brief him when I was at a security product company back in the early 2000s. So now we have the opportunity to work together. Also, go to that talk. It's going to be very interesting. I love hearing Charles speak. Also, I have the pleasure of hosting a cybersecurity threats, kind of what do we think is on the horizon here for 2021. It's not necessarily a prediction show, but really goes into the depths of what did we see occurring with all the shifts that happened last year because of COVID and the economy and work, remote work and the increasing pace of digital transformation, shift to the cloud, et cetera. There were a lot of security impacts or implications to that. So we have, I have Jim Ducharme from the fraud group at RSA, Myla Pilo, who is with Trend Micro. She heads up research there, kind of looking more broadly at the industry. And then John Summers, who with Akamai, who also has that broader perspective of kind of what are we seeing happening across the network of networks. So it's really, really cool group. Check that one out too. It's on March 4th on that Thursday. I hope you'll attend because there's some really great talks that I'm looking forward to hearing also. And I know, virtual conferences, while they may not be exactly, they certainly aren't the replacement of a physical conference. I know we lack some of the personal interaction, but these kind of cyber conferences, virtual conferences that we participate in and are part of doing, we're not trying to recreate the same experience because you really can't. It's just not feasible, at least today. But we are trying to bring really valuable content and more than just people speaking at you with the typical slide, where things that are much more conversational and engaging. I just got off of doing a recording for another panel that was probably one of the most fun I've had on. I seriously mean that. You could say that about a lot of them. This one was, it was hard not to just sit back and watch and engage that way. So at least I got to participate too. But it is fun being part of these things. And I also enjoy watching them because if people have interesting things to say and it's a good topic, it's a engaging topic, then of course that makes it all worth the time. And, with COVID and everything going on, we're working so many more hours a day that just in the world of the analysts, there's so much more to be following and engaging with and talking with customers with and talking with product companies with and strategy and all those kind of things. It's really good to get other perspectives and ideas from peers, people coming up in their careers, people that are maybe more experienced in their careers, and share some of that knowledge too. And it seems like we have a more of a democracy of sharing of information and knowledge. So please check out the Cybersecurity Conference 2021 on March 4th and 5th. You can find out about that event if you go to mediaopsevents.com. just like it sounds, media ops events. There's a link there. You can see upcoming conferences that we're involved in, and of course the cybersecurity conference. Have a great day. Be safe, be careful out there. We'll talk with you again soon.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
All right, our final segment today is Mike Vizard talking with Joshua Laurie, who's the Senior Director for Product and Technical Marketing within the Cloud Business Unit at VMware. They talk about VMware Skyline and observability, and it's a great conversation, so let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. Here we are with Joshua Laurie. He's the Senior Director of Product Technical Marketing for the Cloud Management Business Unit at VMware. There's a mouthful. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Yeah, sorry for putting all that in the title. It's a pleasure to be on, Mike. Been looking forward to this all week.
All right. So you guys have been running this VMware Skyline service for years now, I think, and you're seeing a lot of data on a regular basis. Is there anything in there that's leaping out at you, and how much data are you collecting, and where does it all come from?
Yeah, we have been running the service for a few years now. We announced the service with Pat and Michael Dell on stage at VMworld 2017. Really, the mission at that time was to get in front of customer issues by using the product usage data that's coming out of our solutions, right? So to avoid problems before they occur, using proactive intelligence. We also have a submission to, if you do run into a problem, if we didn't catch it proactively, how do we speed up the time to issue resolution, right? And so automating away some of those laborious tasks like uploading logs to support, right? These are things that are really customer frustrations and friction points that we just took off the table, and really about reducing effort for customers, which increases brand loyalty, as we know. And so this all requires, product usage data. So when we first started the service, we had 0 customers on board. It was a net new service to VMware that we incubated. And this requires data coming out of our products. What we use is the product APIs. So we support vSphere, vSAN, NSXV, NSXT, Horizon VDI environments. We just added VCF support, so SDDC Manager and the whole solution, and then also VROps Manager. And so we're collecting product telemetry data, and that consists of configuration state, some performance metrics, but pretty non-intrusive data that customers are able to share. However, we started with our largest, most strategic customers, what we call our premier support customers. There are about 1,000 customers that are very, very large. They own a lot of our technologies. They're operationalizing our technologies, and we started with like the hardest group essentially when we launched the service, and we wanted to do that because we wanted to learn what this was going to actually uncover. And what we learned was that there's a ton of stuff coming in our front door that customers are submitting as cases, tickets that are problems that we could be avoiding, right? vSphere alone takes up the lion's share. Like we have all these products in our portfolio, but vSphere alone takes up the lion's share of tickets coming through the front door in a reactive fashion. So if Skyline only supported vSphere, we'd still be solving a lot of the problems proactively. And these are configuration issues. These are software bugs that are being taken care of in patches and upgrades, right? So we can provide upgrade guidance and things like that. These are security vulnerabilities, which are really hot button items. And so customers can go into Skyline and they can filter for what their preference is. Let's say I'm an admin really looking for security vulnerabilities. I can go in there and pinpoint for vSphere, that platform, what are the most critical security vulnerabilities that have been codified in the Skyline engine. Or I can go in there and be like, hey, I want to get more performance out of my vSAN environment. I'm going to go look for the top vSAN configuration findings and go take care of that. And what we've noticed is customers that do planned downtime and use Skyline to fill that planned downtime with intelligence, with things that are actually going to help them with performance, security, reliability, it's reducing their overall unplanned downtime. And we're seeing a direct correlation to how much time customers are spending proactively. Hey, I'm going to change the tide. I'm not going to be chasing my tail around on the call with a vendor all day long in reactive firefighting mode. I want to get ahead of that, and I want to spend a little bit of time doing proactive to see my reactive time go down, if that makes sense. That's a long-winded answer, but that's sort of what we're seeing in this space as we've grown the service over the last 2+ years.
And you're describing this as proactive intelligence. So how far in front are people getting in front of their issues, or am I just getting kind of a report that then I got to go find what the issue is myself? Or what does proactive intelligence mean these days, and what might it mean tomorrow?
Yeah, a very specific definition for us, proactive intelligence. There's a lot of tools on the market that do monitoring of a lot of things, and they call themselves proactive. And in reality, they're really alert storms that it's a bunch of white noise. So you as the user have to go in there and decipher. They're very powerful tools, don't get me wrong. But you as the user have to go in there and decipher, where is this happening in my environment? What is the issue, right? You have to do some troubleshooting. And then what do I do to actually solve that, right? Because you still got to go back and say, okay, I found the issue. I found what it is, but what do I need to patch? What version do I need to go to remediate this issue? What we wanted to do with Skyline is keep it super simple. KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid, and really say we're going to pinpoint exactly where the issue exists. For example, when L1 terminal fault came out, Spectre meltdown, those vulnerabilities came out. Customers quickly started to understand these vulnerabilities existed at multiple layers in their virtual infrastructure. ESXi level, the vCenter level, the VMware hardware level. So when you're managing thousands of hosts, tens of thousands of VMs, how do you pinpoint what the issue is, where it exists very quickly, and then what do you actually do about it based on your tailored configuration and version that you're running? And Skyline puts that all together in a package to say, here it is, here's the answer. There's no looking around. There's no dashboard configurations that you have to customize to tune this thing in. It's just, that's what it is, right? And so that's what we mean by proactive intelligence. So the other thing that I'll be transparent about is that these are known issues. These are things that have come in our front door. The way we prioritize how we codify these issues is that they're the most impactful issues to our customers. So if we see customers having an issue, we say, oh, maybe that's happening in the entire landscape of Skyline customers. We can quickly codify that, say, wow, that impacts 1,000 customers across the globe. Let's get that out as a proactive finding. And then automatically that shows up in all of those customers that have that issue. And so we can really kind of create an early warning detection system, which we did not have before. Because if you think about it, VMware owns the private cloud space, right? Private cloud is a black box to us. When customers used to call us up with problems, we would ask them silly questions like, how are you configured? What versions do you have? We didn't know. And now Skyline brings this visibility, observability into the support group, into our TAM community, our technical account manager community, where we can now have an intimate, tailored conversation about, we know you, Mr. Customer. We know what you have. You have a specific configuration or solution that you're running. We're going to help you. And we start, hitting the ground running instead of trying to play catch up all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. What is that fine line between what you described as kind of proactive and more prescriptive, where people are going to automate things? Can I take what you're giving me and say with a level of confidence that I'm going to automatically fix that, or are people stopping to evaluate that and then deciding what to do? I mean, how automated can automated be?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the next leg of this journey, which is, hey, we can identify known issues. We also want to identify things that could be unknown issues to VMware. That's kind of the other piece of this puzzle. We can talk about that. But then the other thing that customers, we take a lot of time listening to customers, because this is a SaaS service. We can steer the ship very quickly, and we try to stay as agile as possible based on that customer feedback. So when we talk to customers about this next leg of the journey, they say, hey, we're okay with automating stuff. We already write scripts in Power CLI, Chef, Puppet, Salt, based on the Skyline findings, because we can export that into a CSV and we can load it into a script. So we're okay with automating this stuff. But if you do it as an integral part of the solution natively, we have to have transparency. We have to be able to test it. We have to be able to integrate it into our ITSM ticketing systems. We need to have full control over what is going to happen. If we're gonna, so it's not true, hey, set it and forget it, Ronco toaster oven, like just willy-nilly making changes in customers' environments. They still need to own the governance and control around what is happening, obviously. And so we need to build those gates and that automation around their processes, right? Meet the customer where they are, integrate with their workflows and their tools. And so there's a whole ecosystem of players there that we're looking at. Obviously, we acquired, Salt Stack, and that's a hugely powerful technology that we can use to connect in with Skyline, the proactive intelligence. So we're looking at, areas like that. But yeah, I mean, that is the next leg is kind of meeting the customer where they are. They have this identified problem set. Now they can go automate it on their time with their processes and their tools and their governance model.
All right. Speaking of willy-nilly Ronco toasters, artificial intelligence is the buzzword of the week, month, year. So where does AI fit in this equation? Or is it really AI? It's just kind of machine learning algorithms, and we're moving forward down another level of automation. But what do you think is going to happen as we go forward?
Yeah, we use machine learning to determine what rules we should codify next based on what's coming in the front door reactively from customers. And then we'll use that algorithm to say, here's the next batch of rules we should codify, right? And then we do some pretty powerful data analysis to figure out, hey, here's this huge set of data coming from our customers, which customers actually have this affected in their environment, right? Where are the vulnerabilities? When it comes to AI, the solutions like vRealize AI for vSAN, this was announced last year at VMworld, actually announced at VMworld 2019. It was GA'd at VMworld 2020, and now customers actually have their hands on it. What we're doing there, Mike, is being very deterministic around, if you make these changes in your environment, you will impact the performance by X percentage. Or if you don't make a change in your environment, in 2 weeks, you're going to have a problem. So that's where the AI part comes in, where it's actually learning from the vSAN clusters in your environment. You tag vSAN clusters up and you say, hey, I want to run this algorithm across it. And then the AI model comes up with these predictions of confidence of, hey, your performance is going to increase by 70% if you make this one change. Or if you don't make that change, you're going to have downtime. Mm-hmm. And we're 90% sure that it's going to happen because we see it across multiple customers and things like that. So that's where you can start to see not only the AI use cases coming in when it comes to supportability, manageability, but also the end game that is self-driving data center, right? If cars can start driving themselves, if Elon Musk can do it this year or next, why can't the data center, right? And it still needs to have that governance. It still needs to have that transparency, all of that just stuff, right? It needs to have the exit button. You take the wheel and you can do it yourself. But that's where we're going with this. And I think vRealize AI is a really good example, and customers are loving it. The customers that are using it for vSAN are loving it. And now they're saying, what other products can you do this with? right? Can you do it with NSX networking? Because that's a big headache for us, for example.
So speaking of that, is security going to get rolled up into this function, do you think? Is that just going to be another data point that we're going to include as part of the operations, or where does that fit in the lexicon of things?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Security is a hot button topic with our customers, especially right now. It's always been, but it's really heating up right now. Skyline today can pinpoint, software bugs, upgrade issues, patches, configuration items, and also security vulnerabilities. And where we get that security vulnerability information is from our security advisories. So you may have heard of VMware security advisories. Those are based on the most severe vulnerabilities that we see. And if once we get those vulnerabilities from that system, we turn that around in a very quick SLA for our customers inside of the Skyline rules engine. So for example, the last vulnerability that came out within 24 hours, it was in Skyline, and all the customers that were impacted by it saw exactly what it was, where it was in their environment, and then what to do about it. So that's what we do as far as security right now. It's really focused on the VMware components and based on security advisories. When you talk about the whole ecosystem of security and vulnerabilities and hacking and virus detection, we're not there yet with Skyline. We have things like Secure State. We have things like Carbon Black that fill those voids and do a really good job at that. We haven't integrated Skyline with those things, but there have been requests to do so because security is such a hot topic, and we want to make security at VMware intrinsic to the platform. So we are looking at those things, but nothing solidified. So that's kind of like what we do today, what's on the truck today for Skyline, and kind of how we're rounding out the security landscape and consolidating it with Carbon Black and Secure State. Does that make sense?
It does. Do you have any ambitions to expand the service beyond VMware platforms? Because there's lots of stuff out there with open APIs, so you could just pull that in too, or what do what's the thought process there?
Yes. There are ideas and thoughts about opening up the ecosystem in a couple ways. You mentioned the APIs, right? So there's customers, very large customers that want to take this data and put it into their systems, right? And they don't want to use the GUI that is Skyline Advisor. So there is that request. There's partners that are managing thousands of customers that want to pull it into their systems and say, now I can see all of my customers at once, and I can provide a proactive cloud service and increase SLAs and all of that. And so, we have public references like, Rackspace and IBM that are using this across their customer base to support their customers right now through the GUI, but they are, requesting that sort of stuff. There are other things like, hey, we have VCF and VxRail. These are very hot items in the market. That requires support across not only the software stack, but the hardware stack. And, what is Dell's relationship in the support experience with VMware when it comes to VCF and VxRail? And so we did introduce 2 years ago at VMworld an integration with Dell's Support Assist Enterprise, which is essentially their VMware Skyline version of Skyline. And so now we can actually cross-pollinate the two services to make sure that customers, if they're running Dell hardware underneath VMware software, they can say, am I running Dell's proactive hardware support? No? Okay, here's where I go to install it, right? So we can identify those gaps, and then vice versa. If the customer is in the Dell Support Assist UI, they can say, oh, I'm running VMware on top of these servers, but I'm not running Skyline. And so we kind of cross-pollinate adoption through this integration. And so that's kind of like the first stepping stone to opening up the ecosystem. We have other requests to open this up to other third-party vendors to make this an ecosystem play. But right now, we're really trying to focus on the VMware house and make that as clean as possible, and then we'll kind of grow. Right, because it's a lot. I mean, VMware does integrate. We are partner channel company, and we want to get there. But right now, we got to take care of our own, and then spread the wealth as we go along.
Do you see VMware customers embracing DevOps as a principle, and are they using your data sources to drive that? Are you starting to see IT administrators morph into site reliability engineers, SREs? What is the current state of the culture, do you think?
Yes, we are. We try to be a pace car with our customer base. Some customers are still just VI admins, working on VMs and they're not doing CI/CD pipelines or anything like that. It's just the traditional, and that's okay. And we're working with those customers to modernize. But then there's customers on the bleeding edge where we have to run really fast with to keep pace with and stay one step ahead. Customers, I can share one public reference, Sky in the UK, big television media company, largest in the UK. They've been using Skyline almost since day one. And they were our first European customer to come on board the service, which is a big deal for us. And they are very advanced in their IT processes. They think their IT shop thinks like a DevOps developer. They are always talking to their development teams. And they use Skyline to provide consistent, resilient infrastructure to their dev teams, especially when it comes to things like VDI environments, right? So when they build out a new infrastructure on VCF and then they layer on Horizon on top of that, there's a lot of complexity in that solution and there's a lot of moving parts. And so when they deliver that to their workspace development team to go put applications on top of that, they got to make sure that that's standardized. It has been checked off. It is, doesn't have any issues underlying. And so they use Skyline to basically deliver that service in an automated fashion and make sure it's pristine. It's been checked off. And so that's how they're integrating this data into their pipeline. And they can deliver not only speed, but resiliency and continuity. And in today's world with the pandemic and these customers, they don't have any more resources. They're trying to do their day job, keep the lights on, and shift into this new modern environment that you're talking about. They don't have any time to manage 10,000 VMs and thousands of hosts. I mean, it's impossible for a human being to do it. It's impossible. So you need technology to help you manage and operationalize it. And so that's what we're doing with Skyline. That's just one example. There are many other very advanced customers that are leaning into this in that sort of way. And, I mentioned, vRealize before, but vRealize automation, that's the core platform is, building a CI/CD pipeline that your development teams can use in conjunction with your IT infrastructure teams. We're looking at ways we can integrate Skyline with that ecosystem. And I think that'll make even a stronger play in the future. So more to come there.
All right. Last question. I feel like we promised everybody that IT would get simpler. And as I look around the landscape right now, I got physical machines and virtual machines, and I got serverless computing frameworks, and I got containers and Kubernetes. Is this going to get any easier to manage, or is it just going to keep getting harder?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope of our vision, right? With VMware is to simplify all this. We talked about intrinsic security. The security market is so fragmented. There's thousands of players. Every day I look at a new startup in the security space. It's not getting any easier. You look at just core infrastructure, right? So now you got all these cloud providers. We are partnered with all the hyperscalers, right? We're also partnered with 4,500 VCPP or VMware cloud providers that are smaller guys, right? The Rackspaces of the world, right? The IBM clouds, and all of those. And so there's that. But the hope is, and then you got the application space, right? But the hope is that using VMware to, tie all of these different systems together in a unified operating model it's pretty well known, and tie all these clouds together, tie all these security features and capabilities together in the platform, that simplifies things for our customers so that they can move faster and deploy new services at a quicker pace. And so that is the goal. That is our strategy. When I look at, you mentioned cloud SRE or SRE space, right? More of our customers are turning into that because they're managing multiple clouds. It's not just on-premise anymore. They're managing AWS and Microsoft and Google. And so, now that VCF is the building block, underneath all of these partnerships, Skyline supports VCF, right? So we're trying to simplify at these building block levels so that customers get the same look and feel across that ecosystem. And so we're doing our part as VMware to simplify. However, there's just so much innovation in this space, and I don't think it should stop. It's just, the big players need to look ahead, gobble this stuff up, and say, how do we unify the experience as much as possible? And it goes back to reducing customer effort. AWS grew so quickly from a cloud and also retail. I have boxes of AWS or Amazon piled up from my front door probably at this point in the day, because it's just so easy. It's not beautiful. The experience isn't beautiful, but it's just so easy to navigate and get stuff working and operationalized. And that's what really, the core mission here is, like, reduce customer effort, simplify the management across all these different clouds and infrastructures, and provide agility to our customers.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. Joshua is on the hook for the unified operating model. We'll check back in with him in a few months to see how we're doing with that. Joshua, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mike. It was a pleasure, and I hope to be back on soon.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
The security landscape is evolving rapidly in the face of disruption. Growing cyber threats, a global pandemic, and other factors have irrevocably changed the way organizations view and adopt security technologies. Cybersecurity 2021, the new normal, will bring together thought leaders, security experts, and IT professionals in the new security landscape and what's ahead in the years to come. On topics ranging from ransomware to DevSecOps, from speakers including Chen Zi Wang of Rain Capital, Richard Steenan of IT Harvest, and Ira Winkler of Secure Mentum. Visit MediaOps.com/cybersecurity2021 to register.
All right, that's a wrap on today's TechStrong TV, episode 150. I hope you guys enjoyed today's conversations. We'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episode for you. And until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and whatever you do, please stay safe.